Boy, that's catchy, isn't it? What's going on, guys? Welcome to What Are the Odds with Barnes and Baris. Barnes will join us shortly. I figured I'd take us in today because I was in the chat while I was waiting to plug everybody in, and everybody, I was asking about the JOLTS report, whether everybody saw the JOLTS report, and it was a good, solid report. So basically, and I put the link in there for you guys to see it, but the number of job openings in July, because this does lag, so we're looking at the month of July, the number of job openings, it rose a lot more than expected. All right. So for those of you who don't know and don't read PPD on the reg, all right, if you are an economic guy and you like charts and you like your series indicators, stuff like that, then that's definitely the place to go. All right. ppdnews.us/subscribe if you don't want to run into the subscription paywall. Barnes will join us soon. I just want to share this real quick. All right. Because what we're looking at here is the job openings and labor turnover report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. All right. Number of job openings rose significantly more than expected, up to 6.6 million from an upwardly revised 6 million because it was just shy of 6. All right. Hires fell to 5.8 million in July, but that's from a historically high level of around 7 million over the last 2 months. So gangbuster numbers we've never seen before. And there's a lot of work to do still in the labor market, but let's be real here. We can't stay at 7-8 million jobs for a year. It's not going to happen. All right. Total separations were largely unchanged too, which is good, at 5 million. And there's something while we're waiting for Robert, I'll hear the bing when he comes in, and I'll bring him in. But while we're waiting for him, forecasts for job openings range from a low of 5.8 million to a high of 6 million. Believe me, folks, believe me, if this came in shy of the consensus, which was 5.95 million, we'd be hearing about this just like we have been hearing about Donald Trump's remarks to Bob, the smear merchant, Woodward. And we'll talk about that too. I'm waiting for Robert because, look, ultimately, Donald Trump's problem, his biggest problem really is himself. All right. He is. I mean, he's got momentum right now, and here he is stepping on himself. He did it months ago. Every president sits down with Bob Woodward. Nobody likes him. He handled Obama with kid gloves. Why? For the same reason Barack Obama got a Nobel Peace Prize for doing nothing, while Donald Trump has done all this and just got nominated because he was America's first black president. Am I allowed to say that, or am I not allowed to say it? And Ben Shapiro, if you're going to allude to it on Twitter, just don't even say it unless you actually have the courage to say what you really mean. All right? So he didn't get it because he's a breathing human being. He got it because he's America's first black president. And that's how the elites in this country make each other feel better about themselves. That's how they squash their guilt. All right. Anyway, we'd be hearing about this if it was a miss, because we did have some rocky numbers, as you can see right here. All right. For those of you new to PPD, this is what we do over here. You can see separation shot up in March. Job openings started to fall, and hires, of course, started to fall. And then April was pretty ugly, even though separations already started coming down. I want to show you this, though, which is why I thought, let me hop on here before Robert comes in, and I'll add him in a hot minute when he does. Within separations, the quits rate rose to 2.1%, while the layoff and discharge rates decreased to 1.2. Let me say that again. The quit rate rose to 2.1, while layoffs and discharges decreased, that's the rate, to 1.2. The Bureau of Labor Statistics cites in the JOLT report changes in the labor market being reflective of an ongoing effort to curtail the resumption of economic activity following the coronavirus pandemic are to blame. All right. So not the attempt to reopen the economy, the prolonged ongoing effort to stop the economy from getting back to normal is what is to blame. And you will notice, and here's Robert, I'm going to bring him in. You will notice, folks, people quit. That is what caused it. We're not looking at, there not being enough jobs or people quit. Why? They're collecting unemployment benefits. Hey, Robert, how's it going? I had a Schultz report while I was waiting on you.
Sure.
Pop right out at me. Bigger number. If it was a bad number, we'd be hearing about that along with Biden's fake outrage over the Bob Woodward book. All right. We'd be hearing about that too if it was a miss. But if you look at the report, man, I mean, it's people collecting unemployment rather than going back to work. And the jobs are there, Robert. The jobs are there. Finding skilled workers and people who want to go back to work is the problem, man.
Yeah, I mean, wage growth is very good. So there's some manufacturing jobs that need to be caught up, but that's about it for the most part. And I mean, obviously, at some point, the leisure and hospitality industry needs to bounce back in certain parts of the country, airline industry, things like that. But the economy is bouncing back. Trump is getting into double-digit approval on the economy again. Yeah, I think by election day he'll be at 20 plus where he was back in January and February. Wage growth in particular, the chart that you put up last week, which had wage growth on month-over-month wage growth, I think was one of the most important charts for non-supervisory employees in particular.
Yeah, let me see if I can grab that. Go ahead, keep going with your thought. I'll grab it
because it was the two areas for the Midwest are wage growth and war. And then to some degree, domestic security in terms of issues related to riots and crime. But that's probably issue number 3, particularly for the voter groups that Trump uniquely got that he needs to return to the polls in droves on 2020 to prevail. The war he's already achieved, and he continues to up his support on that by announcing more withdrawal. There it is, like the average hourly earnings, particularly, and if you also look at average hourly earnings for non-supervisory employees, that may be what that stat is. The growth rate has been better under Trump than at any rate since the 1970s, early 1980s. And that's a key number when people are seeing that translate into their pocket. Then you add to that a lot of folks are getting payroll tax holidays, so that what's going into their pocket is definitely more than what they were 4 years ago. And now you see that in particular coloration in specific locations like the Iron Range, which one of the most underreported phenomena has been the extraordinary bounce back of the Iron Range because it doesn't fit the media narrative. Trump's steel tariffs on China and steel tariffs in general has rebounded the entire steel industry in Western PA, and who else that plays into is the iron ore mining regions of the reason why they're called the Iron Range. W once famously called them the Iron Ridge, but that's another story. There's multiple reasons why Bushes couldn't win Minnesota. So I mean, I was looking at more of that data today. So I think the Iron Range jobs, and exports, and thanks to the tariffs, just you're talking about 40% improvement in some of the places. They didn't expect this at all. They'd taken a massive hit in 2014, 2015. These are areas that have been voting Democratic almost their entire lives, and their parents' lives, and their grandparents' lives. Very heavily Norwegian, Swedish, Finnish, a fair amount of Italians and Poles and Irish, along the course with Germans. Very ethnic part of the country. Almost all of northern Minnesota is, but the Iron Range is no exception to that. And it's like one of those things that the Nate Silvers of the world will never even know to look at, is that if you told me how many Norwegians were in a county in Minnesota or Wisconsin, I could tell you how much more it trended toward Trump than other counties.
That's right.
It was the number one ethnic group trending toward Trump in the upper Midwest were voters from who had Norway backgrounds. And there's a substantial number. I mean, you're talking about 10, 15, 20% of the population, up to 30% of the population in northern Minnesota are Norwegian. But whereas if you had, read the Bible of American politics, which for everybody out there is Kevin Phillips, Emerging Republican Majority. He wrote it as a text in 1966 for the Nixon campaign. And he goes into detail. You could, in fact, I actually looked at these counties the other day. He has, he has a map that you can look at all the way back from the 60s, where he was doing basically the Norwegian, the Swedish, the Finnish share of the population in different parts of the Dakotas, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. And he even tracked counties by disproportionate shares of those populations. So like here, right, you can see the old map where he has N for Norwegian and S for Swedish,
look at that,
and F for Finnish. This is the kind of thing that if you're a real day election forecaster, you should do. but almost everybody, well, in fact, everybody, well, everyone, Trendy actually does do this, but
He does. He does. Yep.
and he's aware of it. But other than Sean Trendy, nobody else up there does it. Nate Silver, Nate Cohn, Harry Hinton, they have no clue. If
They
I
have
even
no
asked,
connection, no concept of the people, their heritage, their culture, nothing.
exactly, no idea whatsoever. And you could have like county return results like this, where basically Phillips went through the whole history of how Norwegian counties were voting up there, Swedish counties were voting up there, Finnish counties were voting up there, German counties were voting up there, German Catholic versus German Protestant. And what it would have shown you is you would have known to track in the upper Midwest the Norwegian vote patterns in particular, but also all the interethnic groups up there. And if Trump had competent pollsters or political people in either 2016 or 2020, then he would have known that Minnesota was very much in play and that he should have been spending money and time there.
And for those who don't know that, since we're talking about the Slimers of the world, all right, which we're going to get into, I'm telling you, Robert, I'm over this guy now. I'm over it.
Sure.
I'm over it now. I tried to play nice. You're not going to slime me like that without any kind of any credible nothing. I mean, what he says is verifiably bull, and all it ever took was a phone call. All it ever took was an email. He's a slime merchant by trade. And yes. I'm done being nice because, folks, for those of you who don't know, he's a failure. He came from a totally other different space, but he was a loser in it. So he had to intrude on this one. And he bleeds millions of dollars a year, which nobody seems to have a problem with. In the real world, folks, what business do you know could bleed red that badly and still stay afloat? He bleeds because people value the narrative he pushes and the slime that he throws at people.
Well, he's got no real skin in the game.
He has no skin. Look, did he take Robert Cahaley's bet the other day?
No.
Which is how this started. I guess this is what happened, right?
And
I've heard his little feelings.
Well, I've been offering to bet him since 2015, which he has always refused, and told him he could make it an honor bet. All of them have.
Right.
In fact, Dave Wasserman, I guess, got mad at me this week, and so he blocked me, attacked me, and then blocked me, which is always an interesting approach to take.
At least I forced him to do that thread on Florida. Did you see that? He went, I guess Trump could win it. He could still win and lose. Yeah, no kidding. Well, I made you look like a fool.
It's what all of these people do. I mean, I went on YouTube to see these different election forecasting YouTube channels that have sort of popped up over the last year or two. And I was actually looking forward to it. I thought there'd be somebody in there with some interesting analysis, maybe something I'd missed, something that would be a helpful organizational tool in the way going back to Kevin Phillips' books are always helpful. And they're all awful. They basically all they do is for folks out there to understand, like Kevin Phillips is the best political prognosticator, forecaster, explainer of events in American political history, at least in published form. In 1965, when he wrote his Emerging Republican Majority book, it was considered a laughingstock and a joke.
Yeah,
it was the peak of
and
Democratic.
racist.
Oh yeah. They misinterpreted that aspect. Now he also misinterpreted himself the role race would play. Like he thought that certain things would happen in the South that did not happen. Phillips' strength was he was working class Irish from New York City. His weakness was that urban politics tends to be much more ethnic than a lot of the national politics is.
Yeah.
So he always slightly undervalued Protestantism and evangelicalism, in part because he himself was always skeptical of it. I mean, he came from that Irish New York middle-class background. But what he was right about is he said the way the Irish on the sidewalks of New York think tended to be the way folks in Middle Tennessee thought, and vice versa, that if you knew one, you could forecast the other. And the way Phillips, and this is how you should forecast elections, and it's the way I grew up on it. Phillips grew up just studying old precinct history, political ancestries, political narratives, watching how people reacted in real time over time to various public events, and thus how they picked parties, policies, and personalities predicated upon a certain ancestral narrative that they tended to distinctly share. He recognized the commonality between certain racial identity, religious identity, ethnic identity, immigration sensitivity, economic belief structure, cultural approach, and attitudinal approach towards politics and public life. among certain distinct groups, and he was able to map out and forecast how they would vote from election to election because he had studied how they voted, their parents voted, their grandparents voted, their great-grandparents voted, and understood that there were common threads between those groups. That if you knew how the Scotch-Irish thought in the Scottish mountains of the 1600s, you could predict how East Tennessee was going to vote in 1944, namely that it's going to have unusually high turnout to oppose another war, just as they had in 1864 and 1920. So it's that kind of voter history. So you should start with understanding the ancestral narrative of what motivates voters. Second, you should look at real data in real time, and that real data should focus on behavior. That behavior, more than words, dictates and determines forecasting. And
That's and Robert, that's why I've been like, when I came in this, I was kind of light on everybody, because forecasting a presidential election or any election, right? It's not easy. It's not. You're essentially predicting human behavior.
Yes.
The simple question I have here, and you're doing it in 50 different spaces, right? Because it's a US election, so it's very different. But my simple question is, how on earth could you predict human behavior if you don't understand the people you're trying to predict? You understand? It's a very simple concept, folks. You're because he is a glorified poll reader who doesn't know anything about polling. Did you see I don't know if it's incompetence or just ignorance. Did you see his tweet today about, I don't understand how there could be a shy voter, but he puts a yard sign out on his yard. That tells you everything you need to know, Robert. He's never polled a day in his life, and he doesn't understand people. They're not going to tell some random idiot who calls them on the phone, but their neighbor they live with, their communities. It just demonstrates just this lack of stupidity. I mean, really, he's clueless, man.
Well, I actually told someone yesterday that either he or someone would make that exact statement today, because I could see it coming. But yeah, to go back to fundamental predicting human behavior requires knowledge of human behavior.
Of
things like what Scott Adams talks about, what persuades, what does not persuade. And now for electoral forecasting, you have to add to that the ancestral narrative of particular groups and how they tend to vote. And how they tend to react to certain events over time. And third, look at real data in real time, focusing on behavior, not words. Things like voter registration data, presidential primary participation data, whether or not the incumbent party faces meaningful intra-party competition, whether or not the opposition party is more driven by the incumbent than they are their own progressive or their own policy proposals for the country. Looking at yard signs and various forms of public support and public enthusiasm, rally size, bumper stickers, things of that nature, T-shirt sales, Halloween mask sales have actually been much more predictive than Nate Silver has been. And you look at data points like the TV ratings and YouTube activities and which websites are surging in terms of political information to get another sense of excitement and enthusiasm. Then you look at third at the fundamentals, and the fundamentals being, what are the wage growth stats? What are the unemployment stats? Where manufacturing going within states, within regions, within the part, not just the national numbers, but the numbers within particular areas of the country. Like if you knew that, you'd know that the farm recession in 1986 was going to lead to a Democratic Senate, for example.
Right.
Because you had a disparate economic response between the coast and what was happening in the middle of the country. And you look at whether or not there's a war, what's happening. Are we pulling out? Are we getting more involved? What's happening in that sense? And you add those three together, and that's what good election forecasting it is. And at the very, very bottom of that is occasionally checking polls. They're the least significant. They're the least consequential. They matter the least. And they should be the least center of focus. And if they disagree with the other data, you just ignore the polls. And what is unfortunate is that election forecasting has become monopolized by people who are disguising their narrative building as analytical.
That's right.
Objective in that approach.
That's right.
It's never been that way. Nate Silver cost me money. I was not highly critical of Nate Silver in 2016 in a public way because his ineptitude was going to make me money.
Yeah. It's an opportunity.
Exactly. In 2012, his ineptitude cost me money, and in 2020, it's no longer matters. And so to give people a sense of the history of Nate Silver, I've studied him since 2008. I've been involved in election forecasting and betting on elections since I was a teenager. I read Kevin Phillips when I was a kid. I was studying polls and precinct data and other information like that going all the way back. and doing more. And I studied American populism in college. That was my focus. That's where Sean Trendy and I met at Yale in an American populism class, where C. Van Woodward and others.
I didn't know that. I knew you guys went to school together. He told me you went to school together. I didn't know that though. I didn't know that.
He's a shy Oklahoman. He's a shy Trump voter, you might say. Because he's shy at how he could be much more expressive. Like the other day, he puts out a tweet saying, "Well, if Trump wins, what do you think it'll be?" And he does his usual caveat: "I don't think Trump has any chance to win, but just in case." He tries to push back, but in very light ways, which I understand.
He'll get disinvited, man. He'll get disinvited.
Because that's what all of this is about. Just as journalism has become occupied by a politically partisan class that disguises their partisan activism as objective fact-telling, the same is true as you had analytics take over baseball, the sport. And this is where this originated, where Nate Silver came from. Yeah. And so the belief was, wow, and you can watch, the Moneyball, the movie, and read the book. And if you go into the background of that data and information, that's where you'll find a lot of this. And the idea was that you could take objective data analysis and you could be more accurate than subjective interpretations of events. So almost all the people connected to Nate Silver are baseball nerds. They're the people who can give you great intel, which bagel shop is the best bagel shop in New York City, but if they don't expect them to know how to, handle a farm. And so they originally were going to try to be going to a lot of them. Their original goal, initial objective was to take over sports betting and to be influential in sports betting and to build a sports betting network. And the 538 was sort of a mid stopping point on election analysis to try to get credibility to get into the sports betting world. Ultimately, it worked. After 2012, ESPN retained. The reason why 538's at ABC is because they're intended to be an ESPN program.
Right.
They were so bad at their sports betting, what's called handicapping out here in Vegas. And everybody in Vegas treats them as a joke. Nobody takes them seriously.
That's why we call the media handicap. It's the same thing. That's what we mean, folks, when we say media handicap. That's their job, to handicap the race.
Oh. Yeah, and it's to disguise subjective bias. And what happened is in 2012, a lot of Republicans caught on to Silver. It was unfortunate for them that they had the wrong election to expose him in. Now, Silver's analysis in 2012 was complete crap. Now, I was betting Obama, and I was annoyed that Obama was trading as high as he was, because by most of the metrics that political gamblers watch, Obama should have been under 50%.
Yes. Yeah, he should.
And by the way, all the unskew the poll people were actually right. Those polls were skewed. The key was, now Nate Silver's explanation was, registered voter polls are much better than likely voter polls. People forget he kept saying that.
I remember that.
Yes, that was his only reason for saying
he's going to do it again now, Robert. Watch.
Exactly. So that became so embarrassing for him. He dropped it in 14-15, and he sort of pretended he's never said that before. But that was in fact his whole theory. His analysis was terrible. The reason why the 2012 polls were off is because they were not anticipating a major racial shift in the electorate in swing states, which was that African American voters were going to vote at a record level, and white working class voters were going to be at one of the lowest levels.
They were not coming out. Yeah,
exactly. It was, and if you had studied presidential primary participation rate, then you could have seen that showing up. If you realized that the fact that Obama did not have a real challenger and Romney was weak, then you could know that. If you had been following certain TV ratings and other information, you could know that. You could follow signs and stickers. You could go through communities. Obama had real enthusiasm in places that usually never expressed enthusiasm. Inner city, like when I went through in 2016, the inner city areas still had Obama signs and stickers up. They had no Hillary ones, which was a cue, but they still had Obama ones up 4 years later. But Silver was completely wrong. I always described it this way: if when you're betting on it, let's say you're betting on a football game, and you say, "I'm going to bet on this week. I'm going to bet on Georgia to beat Tennessee college football because I think Georgia's going to run all over them." And Georgia ends up covering the spread, but only Tennessee actually runs all over Georgia, and Georgia just recovers 3 fumbles that Tennessee, unluckily loses, and that's how they win. The person was right, but for the wrong reasons. Their analysis was crap. Like,
that's right.
I'll win bets in sports, but my analysis will have been totally wrong. It would have only been luck that I won it.
Right.
And I follow whether what I predicted would happen in the underlying statistical aspects of the game correctly, not just the outcome, because I recognize that luck plays a major role. And if I was wrong, then over time, the Vegas going to catch up with me and my wallet's going to be light. So Nate Silver's always been a fraudster. He's been a fraudster from day one. He has no idea what he's doing. He has no understanding of American politics. All of his methodology is bad. He doesn't understand the ancestral narratives of different groups within the American electorate. That's why he can't predict anything. That's why all he does is read polls and then project what he wants those polls to mean. But what he's done is he's leveraged his influence to monopolize the data analytics community in the media. Almost
and got some help from Team Obama doing that too in 08, after 08.
In the media, in general.
And they're incestuous folks. So if you have somebody like who's a big political star like Barack Obama, and they have family members and friends, they're working at this outlet, ABC is one of them, that outlet, and they tell you they're pushing this guy, and that's going to happen, and that's it. It's done. So he got lucky with that because he got them back. It was pure luck. A 4-year-old could have forecasted that election. Robert, come on.
No doubt. The data community, it was lucky that it was 2012 because they would have done the exact same thing if it was 2016. But the difference was that would have crushed them, and then probably none of those people would have gone anywhere. But from Nate Silver, exactly, from Nate Silver at 538, to give people just a brief update on the sports betting side, he was so bad at it, ESPN jettisoned him. They were supposed to be a part of a firewall program at the new ESPN subscriber service that people are going to be like, oh, I can't wait to see what 538 does. There were people in Vegas who only bet on 538 to bet against them because they were so consistently bad, you could actually make money betting against them. They were atrocious. They had no idea what they were doing. And it was so embarrassing because at root, a lot of these guys are baseball nerds. And so they come, once you understand that, you get a sense of where they can't come from. And that's why they're overly confident. They think a certain kind of data analysis will drive the elections when it doesn't.
That's right.
Though they're really there for reasons they don't fully understand. Some of them do. Trendy partially does, by the way, he's so hesitant to be critical of them. Trendy put out a piece after 2018 that said, by the way, this did not meet the objective standards of a blue wave. That was the most aggressive he's going to be willing to get. And
Robert, I'll tell you right now, and I'm sure, like I said, I'm really done being Mr. Nice Guy. I have emails after 2012 with Sean back and forth about what the Republican Party really needed to do moving forward. His entire argument was a Donald Trump kind of guy and a Donald Trump kind of message. And you know what, Rich? I agree. Working class, which, by the way, you and I have been arguing for years. You don't pander. You just have a working class message, and it bleeds into different racial groups because guess what? Absolutely. Black people work too. Hispanics work too. And it really was always that simple. He thought just like him.
Absolutely, and he's admitted that in other contexts. But he's part of the upper middle class, professional class now, of course. He's in,
and I like him. I'm just saying,
very nice guy. I like
one of those people who doesn't have any.
It shows you how bad for folks out there what Richard's talking about, how bad the media gatekeeping is. That someone like Sean is very hesitant to be critical of this echo chamber bubble that the entire data analysis election forecasters live in. And part of that's because their role really is to be gatekeepers and narrators, not to be objective truth tellers. And someone that comes in and says the emperor has no clothes must be burned at the stake. And that's why he's in, it's not a coincidence that the people that have been dissident, like Rasmussen, like Trafalgar, and like USC in 2016, have been the target of major harassment campaigns by that group. And for people who don't know, if they see Harry Enten at CNN, or they see Nate Cohn at the New York Times, or Elliot Morris over at The Economist, or Dave Wasserman of the Cook Political Report, or some of the people over at Decision Desk, realize that they all come in some level from 538 and Nate Silver. Many of them worked there and got their careers there, got their resume boost there. Others are at least tangentially connected and tied to them. And so the goal is to create this monopolistic narrative that's always been a big lie. Now, as a political gambler, when they're lying on the wrong side, it's favorable to me. I make money by their lies. So that's
Right.
why I've always told people, it's like my argument with Danny Negreanu out here in Vegas. Negreanu would go nuts every time some schmuck like Chris Moneymaker would win the World Series of Poker. She's like, these people are not professional poker players. They just got lucky. I was like, that guy's a gift. Every schmuck in the world's going to think they're going to win at poker, and they're going to come out and bet you, Danny, at the table. He's like, oh, I'm going to outplay Danny Negreanu. They're not going to outplay Danny Negreanu. I was like, that's how you're going to be go from making $100,000 a year to making $1 million a year. But his ego got in the way. And I increasingly think I should have kept my mouth shut over the last several years, because what's happened is, for folks who are wondering, and all these guys are wondering, it shows you how clueless they are. They don't not only are they terrible at election forecasting because they don't use the methods you need to use. They don't study ancestral narratives. They don't study voting patterns of different groups across the country.
They're poll readers, man.
That's all they are.
That's all they are.
The least significant, least reliable form of data, media and university-driven polls, is what they rely upon, which has not been. By the way, this time in 2008, those same polls were saying McCain was going to win. So,
I know.
You don't pay any attention to media university polls. Also, all those media university pollsters know the best way for them to keep their job and keep getting contracts and keep getting celebrated is if they're saying what Nate Silver wants them to say.
And they can't stand him for most. I know so many, and I'm going to start calling them out soon, Robert, because they know me, and I would not sit back and let some of these guys get smeared like that.
Oh, yeah,
absolutely. I would come out and I would say, I know so-and-so. If so-and-so was wrong, he was wrong because he just did something incorrect. But it wasn't like a personal, he'll insult you professionally, and he'll insult you. I get personally too, So yes. I would not sit back if he did this to some of these other guys, and they're sitting back. So soon, I think I'm going to drop some because they all hate him. Mm-hmm. They all think he's a fraud. They're like, why do I have to be judged by somebody who knows nothing about polling? Mm-hmm. But they're afraid they don't get the money if they don't have like at least a B or a B plus on his stupid little faux Pollster rating card. This is the giveaway debunked fake equation, Robert.
No doubt. I mean, obviously, they're making a mistake by defaming you. But the other component of this is they are I think, in a state of desperation because they don't understand any of the markets, including the betting markets, and just like they don't understand the elections, and they really don't even understand
the Super Bowl. Look at the Super Bowl; they can't do anything right. Yeah, the Super Bowl was horrible.
Oh, yes. Analysis on multiple levels. People have made fun of his, 97, 98% chance a certain team wins. And then
that's what happened last time.
Yeah, exactly. So he's done that many times. But the biggest problem is what's kept them alive is Silver has been highly cognizant of wanting to be in sync with the betting markets because he realizes that the people who hire him and the people who want the narration to be of a certain script, they want to see the betting markets corresponding to what he's saying. And up until 3 weeks ago, the betting markets almost always paralleled what Nate Silver thought. If anything, they slightly would understate the degree to which a Democrat would do well compared to Nate Silver. So they were always like more pro-Trump than Silver was in 2016, more pro-Romney than Silver was in 2012, so on and so forth. But he gets nervous, and they're all nervous because the betting markets are now rejecting them.
They're not listening to them. Yeah.
And I can tell people why that is. It's because of Wall Street. So Wall Street has a bunch of people who do election analysis. They've done it with different degrees of intensity over the years. But after 2016, they decided to invest some serious capital having some real data people do election forecasting. Most of it is internal. Some of it's subscription driven, but a lot of it is not publicly available, but it's leaking out over the last month. It does.
I just got JP Morgan's the other day.
Yeah, exactly. And so what's happening is they have figured out that Silver and everyone connected to him are scammers and fraudsters and fakes and phonies. And so every single election forecaster is predicting between a 68 and 93% chance that Biden wins. There's not a single political betting market in the world that agrees with him right now. In fact, the political betting markets are between 50 and 55% for Biden. And what's impressive about that is the diversity of those markets. Predictive is a small-scale American-driven market. Betfair is a heavy UK international-driven market. All the other markets are offshore books or British bookies, and those also have different markets. What's extraordinary is that since about mid-August, they all agree it's a 50-50 race. And no matter what Nate Silver says, no matter what Nate Cohn says, no matter what Elliot Morris or Harry Enton or Decision Desk says, they are being completely ignored. And the reason why they're getting nervous about it, I tweaked them on it. I just what got Wasserman to
what made him block you? What kind of a
so
turd?
first
What
he
kind
made
of a turd would block you anyway? Can't you argue
Yeah.
I don't block that much, man. I'll
Well, it's
argue.
because-
I don't block. You know,
I mean, I've been quasi trolling these guys for 4 years, and I would just point, and mostly it was
Get
just
over it.
want to wager, just to point out that they have no skin in the game.
Right.
And some of them will say that they can't wager. I know Trendy's rules prohibit
please.
him from doing that, but from the others, I have doubts about that. And even if it were true, my point was just make an honor bet. Then you don't have to bet money.
Yeah,
you can just make a public honor bet. But they're not willing to do that either. If you had followed, the other thing I tracked was if you had taken when they disagreed with the betting markets by a decent enough margin to where theoretically you could make a profit by following them,
you'd lose money.
You'd lose money every single election cycle. So so that's where, I mean, only Nate Silver in 2012 where you would have made money. For the rest, you would have lost and lost and lost and lost. So given that dynamic, I've been tweaking them about the betting markets disagreeing with them because they've all been nervous about it. They've been trying to see if they could talk to each other and somehow figure out why are the betting markets suddenly disagreeing with us. Could we coerce them back in line like we coerced
That's what I'm smelling right now. That's what I'm smelling right now.
The problem is betting markets don't care. It's their own money, and the reason is, and that they're only now starting to figure out, Wall Street has figured out their frauds. Yeah. And what makes them worried is that means they're going to get fully exposed. If they lose 2020, they may never be respected and may just get canned. Because all the networks may say, you guys are useless. You can't even shape a narrative. For
people who don't know, JP Morgan, like Robert was saying, a lot of these big financial institutions, they're doing their own. I got JP Morgan's the other day, and it said that basically some polling is here, some polling's there. In total, when we look at the indicators, employment, that was a big jobs report, wages are strong, and then manufacturing, these are Trump voters. So whether or not they'd want to get to the polls to keep my damn job, and maybe they're not going to show up. They also straight acknowledge social desirability bias, that there are just going to be polls are going to be bad this year. So let's not focus on it. And if this keeps up, Biden's lead will be gone by the end of September. That's basically what they say.
And I hear from some of these guys because some of them followed me. That's why I'm saying I should have kept my mouth shut. If Nate Silver would have dominated he dominated so long, I thought there was no risk. And so I could tweak him, have a little fun. But it turns out the betting markets no longer respect him at all. I mean, there's zero. And the problem is that means they've already figured out he's a phony, that he's a fraud, and that they're all frauds. That Nate Cohn is a fraud. Harry Enton is a fraud. Elliot Morris is a fraud. If any of them want to sue me for me calling them a fraud, I'll prove it in court. So they're not going to be suing me.
Robert, models don't gyrate like that. In 2014, when we debuted the model for the Senate and the gubernatorial elections and the midterms, I did it because I just got tired. I'm always been a numbers guy, always been a modeler, I'm a nerd, but every single cycle, like you look, they're always wrong in one direction. So they're never wrong where they favor Republicans. That, like polling outliers, is not statistically possible unless something is wrong, unless something is screwy with how their so-called models work. And then it really dawned on me because you dig through the methodology. They're not models. They're poll reading. That's it. And it was proven to be the case in 2016. Models don't shift like that. If your model goes from whatever it was for Hillary Clinton to Donald Trump and swings in a matter of 2.5 hours, then you were wrong. It's not a model, folks. Your model should not gyrate. And that was one of the first things that we put up. How will our model be different? Well, our model is a big picture, fundamentals driven model. You will not see it gyrate with every public poll that is released. And if it does, that's not a model. That is a poll reading operation. All right. There's a big difference because one data variable is not going to skew and the weighting that you would have to put. Robert, polls would have to be weighted so considerable compared to other variables in their so-called model that when a public poll came out, it would move the ratings the way that it moves theirs. All right. And the same thing, with Sabato, I don't even think that's at the Crystal Ball, who I like, honestly, I respect more than I respect Silver and
He
others.
doesn't take the kind of pot shots that those guys do.
No.
He doesn't try to gatekeep as much.
And a lot of it is him being around for many years. So, for instance, he won't move North Carolina. He knows that is the polling has not been great. It's going to be a Trump state. So he's not going to do that because he's not going to be caught in that. And the one time we ever adjusted that model was because we did give the polls a little bit too much weight. In North Carolina, it was clear. It was Tillis by 2, a little under 2, and, a very narrow victory, but Kay Hagan was done. And the damn polls, not a single one had Tom Tillis up. And that's what gave it a slight edge for Kay Hagan. And we did it, and we gave it with a caveat. So the model says Tillis, but when you factor in the polls, it's going to push it towards Slate. And then after that year, we adjusted because I wasn't going to let that happen again. And then in 2018, we put up 3 different ones. Here is the model alone with no influence from polls. Here is the model like a hybrid kind of what although I don't know what else goes into his hybrid. Have you ever been able to discern what else goes into his model? There's nothing else there. And then he's got the polls only. The model performed.
He has a little bit
better.
of economic data, a little bit of historical data.
Yeah, but what are the weights? What are the weight? Like,
but
how,
most
you know
of it
what I
is.
mean?
But most of it is speculative about
It's
polling error, risk, etc. I mean, the thing with all
it's
a
not
poll
objective. It's not objective at all.
A poll is a mechanism of election forecasting, because we don't have the election tomorrow. I've never gone along with the theory that the poll is measuring what would happen tomorrow. I was like, no, if a poll's a good poll, it's projecting what's going to happen on election day.
Right.
It's just a mechanism of election forecasting, and it should be the lowest one on the actual list of tools to use to forecast an election if you're going to be betting on it, or you're going to be making Wall Street investments based on it, or anything like that. If for that, you need to look at and in particular, and then it's useful to know the polls. It's useful to understand how they work. It's useful to understand how they function. It's useful to understand their limitations. But they're not the best way to forecast an election. It's the underlying data of history and behavior that you can witness that will tell you a much bigger story. And then the polling can tell you something after that.
Yeah, Richard Cordray was never ahead of Mike DeWine in Ohio, folks. Let me just break this down for you, okay? Phil Bredesen was never going to be a serious challenge to Marsha Blackburn. Joe Donnelly was always going to go down, okay? He was going to go down to Mike Braun. And Bill Nelson was going to have a very difficult time holding his seat. None of those states were called correctly. They were the biggest elections that year at the statewide level. And then also to, Arizona, I'll admit because this is what I do, I mean, I have been more transparent than anybody, which is what really chaps my, it really does. In Nevada, Dean Heller had shown the ability to win independents by that margin. So it would have tightened Washoe a lot. He would have done better in Reno. It's your state, he demonstrated the ability to win independents by that kind of margin. So that is why it was lean Heller or slightly Heller, which was a miss. And then
for Heller, it was knowing on the ground that Heller didn't care.
Yeah.
Heller didn't really want to go back.
He didn't. He was not campaigning. He
had no passion at all.
No.
Heller followed me on Twitter. Nice guy.
I heard he's a wonderful guy.
Yeah, I did. He's just tired of Washington, and so if you knew that there was no chance he was going to prevail. And then polling is difficult in Nevada. It's different.
Is.
It's difficult for different reasons in Arizona. And Nevada is the only state where polls tend to overstate the Republican margin, largely because they miss the Asian vote. And the Asian vote trendingly heavily Democratic. Yeah. Big Filipino, but this was where I go back to know your ancestral narratives, know your voter groups within a particular state, and know their other behavioral indicators, because a poll is not likely to capture 3% of the vote, but that 3% of the vote may be very important. Maybe the key of swinging, they may be going 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 in a certain direction, and that be a tipping factor they're just missed in a lot of the surveys. Asian voters are in general. In parts because they're so small a sample size, you're never getting a really good subsample.
Yeah, it's not. And
unless
the
you
younger ones too. If
Yeah.
you go on an online panel, they tend to they'll tend to participate on the online panel, but you can't get anybody who's like over the age of 45. It's ridiculous.
And there's such huge differences between like Indian
the
voter
subgroups.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly. If you get Sikhs, you're going to get a very, and let's say you imagine your Sikhs are your whole Indian voting group. Well, you're going to get a very misleading number.
That's kind of what happened to us in 2016 nationally. Asian other, when you parsed out Asian, took Asian away, Trump was actually carrying other like 52, 54%. And when we looked in after the election, there's just too many, more conservative Sikhs and not enough like Pacific Islanders and stuff. You know what I mean? And seriously,
Correct.
So that it's just such a small group when you're only getting 3 or 2% of the entire electorate. You're not talking about a lot of responses. So, I mean, it's
it's
sampling
no doubt
are
about
huge
that
for that single group.
Exactly. And so it's knowing all of that. And so the problem for the Nate Silvers of the world is that they have bad methodology from the inception. The second problem is compounded by the fact that they've decided to surround themselves by the same group. So some years ago, PBS related to a Charles Murray book talking about the increasing divide within white America, they created basically a poll to measure your working class or not by just simply your awareness of certain cultural identities and aspects. So it was how often you ate out at Applebee's, how much you knew about popular TV shows and regular folk
I
movies.
loved it.
Oh, it was fantastic. It was
Yeah.
fantastic. What shocked me was how many people in the media basically were so upper middle class, they were completely culturally disconnected from working class America to a scale that was just incredible. I mean, these were people who couldn't identify a single military insignia, had never been to a popular chain restaurant, didn't know any friends who were either evangelical Christians or smoked cigarettes.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about off the charts social, economic, political disconnect. And that's the way all of that Nate Silver group is. They're all, they'll fit in just fine in a cafe in New York City or West LA or San Francisco,
and cheese tasting,
or the equivalent of it in the north side of Chicago. But they have absolutely are disconnected from anything in real life of ordinary people. If they took that test, they would be in the most upper middle class section. And what that leads to is articles like Nate Cohn talking about this week, where he's saying that Donald Trump is running on an agenda of racial division in order to maximize the white vote. I'm going to give you the data analysis why I think that's wrong. Well, the whole premise is wrong. That's an absurd premise, and it's completely disconnected from reality.
What would you explain his higher vote share in Miami-Dade?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, no, it's a class-based appeal driven on war and economics and security, and that's it. And like he doesn't realize that most of the Mike Cernovich was talking about this last night. Most of there's going to be a surge in working class African American and Hispanic support for Trump, in part in response to the riots, because it's the people that are the most impacted and most annoyed are working class African Americans and Latinos.
That's right. That's right. So, and we found that it was crystal clear. We found that
go back into history.
Yeah.
Sorry, just briefly. 1968, 1972. Well, the black vote peaks in Democratic loyalty in 1964. They have the riots in 67, 68. They continue after 68. The Democratic share of the black vote goes down, not up. It goes down after the riots in 68, again in 72. Now, Republicans aren't winning the black vote, but all they needed was just some erosion of black voter support. And so history tells us what's going to happen. But that's how disconnected they are. They have no clue what's happening out there. And when you don't know what's happening out there, like you go to great efforts to look at the polling data you're getting and how much does it match up what you know objectively about those groups. So, for example, if you end up with 35% of your Republicans in a state are young and African American, that's probably
something's
not
wrong.
You have a sampling issue. You have to go back and sample more. In the same way, one thing that you pointed out 4 years ago that I think is increasingly critical, and as we bridge this over into discussing the upper Midwest states and looking at the data analysis, is there's a twofold phenomenon going on in the political realignment. Part of it is class, just socioeconomic status, best measured by, but not completely controlled by education. Education is a rough proxy for class, but it's not a perfect proxy for
It's
class.
not, you're right. It's not exact.
And then the other component of it is geography.
Yep.
And that's the part that has badly been missing from all the polls. It's the part that, I mean, as you went through, you had to go through great efforts to try to reach those voters, because even using all three modes, using online, using text, using mobile, using landline, all of those modes, they're just not answering polls anymore. And so you have to beg, yell, scream, hoot, and holler to get them to do anything. The reason why
the hostility, Robert. It's almost a hostility.
The reason why the USC got them all to participate, and that's why they were foreshadowing something unique in 2016, is that effect. And what you found was it was because they paid them $2 to participate. And they only required them to answer 2 questions. Once they answered all of their first questions, they knew who they were for demographic purposes. So each week they were just answered once a week. I just got to say, am I going to vote? And what's the likelihood I vote? What's the likelihood I vote for a particular candidate? And they'll send me $2. Oh, okay. At some local bars where they live, you can actually get a beer for that. So so that's the dynamic of what's going on. There's this massive geographic gap, and there we can start with the bridge into the conversation about data analysis that none of the data nerds are doing while they're busy defaming those who are doing it, and that is voter registration data. Which Nate Cohn loved voter registration data.
What happened to that?
Yeah, in 2016, when it showed the surge of young Puerto Ricans registering to vote in Florida. Now he's not talking. None of them are talking about it at all. And why they're not talking about it, I broke it down over the past week. In rural America, almost everywhere, whether you're talking about Pennsylvania, whether you're talking about North Carolina, whether you're talking about Florida, whether you're talking about Arizona, Nevada, whether you're talking about the upper Midwest, you're seeing double-digit Republican voter registration trends since 2016 amongst working-class whites in rural areas across the entire country. That's why Pennsylvania has moved net Republican. That's why the voter file in Pennsylvania has moved net Republican. That's why the voter file in North Carolina has had one of the biggest movements they've ever had, period. I mean, a 4-point statewide movement. And when you realize there's only a little bit of movement amongst African Americans, Latinos, and the big metropolitan areas, and the metropolitan areas are actually trending Democratic, that gives you an idea. It's double-digit movement. It's 10-point plus movement when you look at working-class whites all across the entire country. And you're seeing it, and that's what you're seeing it in Pennsylvania, see it in North Carolina, see it in Florida, see it in Arizona, see it in Nevada. Like in Nevada, for example, still +5 Democrat like it was in 2016. Yeah. But John Ralston, I think, who also blocked me on Twitter because I was telling him he was predicting it was going to be +7.
Cornballs, man.
+8. +7, +8 Democratic in Nevada. I said, no, it's not. And he said, you're full of it, and went into this long debate. And I was like, well, here's where you're wrong. And so then he blocked me. Well, guess what? Here we are, September 1st. It's +5, which is the same as it was September 1st, 2016. Now, why is that when Nevada is more Mexican-American today than it was 4 years ago, by about 2 points? So you should have a 1 point to 1.5 point movement Democratic like you do in voter registration trends in Arizona. It's because white voters over 35 have moved so heavily Republican in Nevada.
Right.
And particularly in the rural parts, but even in parts of Las Vegas. So when we're looking at data points, the first thing I'm looking at for election forecasting is what's happening in voter registration. Voter registration, for folks that out there don't know, generally doesn't move much from election to election.
No, it's usually
static. Flat. Exactly.
Yeah, it's very static.
When
affiliation is fluid. So if you ask somebody, they may not go and change their registration, but they may tell you from 1 year to another cycle,
or they may
a Democrat, I'm a Republican. That's a little bit more fluid.
There's more movement within the voter file because they pick up donations, they pick up primary participation.
And I wanted to show you that actually, Robert, after we were talking about Minnesota, I did that. I ran a donation analysis, and some of it's vote history. This is Pennsylvania, and let's go over Pennsylvania first a little bit, a couple of counties I just want to point out. And then we'll get into Minnesota because, man, it blew me away.
So for everybody watching, the other thing for an overarching view when we're talking about all these states that I want to highlight is you have the realignment that's happening in America is 2 major groups. Big metropolitan America, 250,000+ votes, big cultural centers. These groups are trending Democratic by 2 to 5 points. By contrast, what I call middle America, your medium American cities, your Cincinnatis, your Pittsburghs, your Clevelands, your Milwaukees, your Kansas Cities. These places are mostly staying static. They're not moving one direction or the other. Precincts within those areas are moving different ways. Professional class, Democratic, working class, Republican, but they're mostly staying static. Then working class America, particularly working class small town America, is moving massively Republican. And they're moving Republican at a much faster and more aggressive pace than metropolitan areas are moving Democratic. And it's why by net, a state like Pennsylvania has moved 2 points Republican in voter registration since 2016. And in Pennsylvania, basically, if you look at the Philly area, that's about 2 to 3 points more Democratic. Now, not the city of Philly, but just the affluent professional class suburbs around it. But you get to Berks County, which is really a mixed county. I'm not Berks County, Bucks County.
And that's I'm going to show that because that is not a good sign. The last numbers that were just reported, not good for Democrats at all.
Exactly.
But go ahead.
And for people who don't know, Bucks County is sort of an extension. Philly used to be
here over here, folks.
Northeast Philadelphia and Southeast and Northeast Philadelphia used to be working class, heavily Italian. Think
Irish Italian.
Exactly. Think the movie Rocky, things like that. That's, the old Italian mob had a stronghold in the South Philly. Now, they've mostly moved out. There's still pockets of it. Fishtown, which was the center of Philly, used to be the oldest continuous working class community in America. By the way, Fishtown, now it's about half hipster, half working class. But it was not a surprise that when the riot started and a self-enforcement, self-defense group started, it started in Fishtown. In Fishtown, a bunch of guys came out with bats saying anybody that comes in is going to get whacked. Yeah, exactly. That's old school Philadelphia. That's the part of Philadelphia that booed Santa Claus. That's the part of Philadelphia that throws batteries at people that they don't like in the baseball field. So that booed Donovan McNabb when he was getting picked. Old school, tough, rough Philadelphia. But a lot of those folks have moved out to Bucks County. So Bucks County is split between upper middle class in parts, but it's heavily working and working middle class mostly. And that's why Bucks County, unlike Montgomery County, unlike Chester County, unlike Delaware County, those suburban counties that ring, they used to call it the main line because there was a main subway that went up into or streetcar that went through the key part of affluent old school establishment Philadelphia up into Montgomery County. In fact, Kevin Phillips called them all part of the megalopolis, New York, Philly, Boston. Now we call it the Acela Corridor, but that's the oldest school establishment. Used to be the heart of the GOP back in the 1950s. The old Yankee Republicanism,
the real old grand old party. Yes,
exactly. That crowd. That was Arlen Specter's base came from there. By contrast, the Trump Republican Party is hated in that area, and that area is trending Democratic. But African-American Philly's not moving at all. And so there is no surge in voter registration amongst African-American voters. There's no surge amongst millennials.
Nothing.
So, if there was going to be a bunch of new voters, we would see it in voter registration data by now.
It's not happening. Yeah, and let's go through a couple of these, Robert, because that was all great information, right? So keeping this map in your mind as best you can, and I'll go back up, folks, all right? But look at central Pennsylvania, all right, which is right around here. You can see it's lighter, all right? So we're talking about a lighter area, but Northumberland, Robert's mentioned that before. You see small Republican gains pretty much. This is not, hugely populated, but it is an area of the state where Democrats used to do well. If you look back at Al Gore versus George Bush, Robert, totally
and percentage-wise, you're seeing double-digit movement towards Republicans.
Yes.
Well, once you factor in the working class share, if I could look at the working class share of those counties, and outside of the urban counties, they're moving 10 points or more in favor of Republicans in voter registration, which for people to understand is one of the biggest moves towards Republicans in history in the state.
And even in small population centers, those kinds of movements, they add up. And this is the story. The media never tells this story, folks. If I can stress anything to you, it is that political coalitions do not shift in a vacuum. They never shift in a vacuum. And when you look at, you're looking at some of the Delaware, but Bucks was the one, Robert, that I really cared about. I don't mean to minimize anywhere else, but this is also North Central. Obama actually did very well with Biden on the ticket. Not good news for them. Northeast, again, a big deal because Luzerne, Robert, look at Luzerne. Democrats a month or so ago, I was talking to, were actually really happy with what they said with some progress in Luzerne. And remind me to hat tip this guy. He did good work. So I don't want to reinvent the wheel and I'm showing his stuff. I should hat tip him. But Luzerne completely reversed on them. I mean, so what hope they had has now more than dwindled. Right.
For folks who don't know, that's up in the Scranton, Wilkes-Barre area.
That's right. This is supposed to be Biden's area, folks. Okay. It's not happening. Yeah.
Trump's whole line, like where he did that comedic routine, where he's like, Joe Biden says he's from Scranton. He hasn't been in Scranton in 7 decades.
And they love that stuff. They love that kind of talk over there. Lackawanna, another disappointment for them, Robert. That's all of that. This is supposed to be that's right.
Old industrial. For people who don't know, Wilkes-Barre has a heavy coal mining history plus an industrial history, actually a little bit of oil history. And the reason why for Pennsylvania and Minnesota, we'll talk about fracking. For some of these two areas that matter were manufacturing and fracking. And energy used to be limited largely to a Texas, Oklahoma kind of issue politically. Fracking changed that equation because fracking allowed for energy jobs to be created in the upper Midwest, particularly in parts of Ohio, Pennsylvania, and even the Iron Range. Like several of the mayors that flipped in Democratic mayors.
Yeah, we'll go over that in a bit too. Interesting stuff over there.
There's a reason why Kamala Harris this week was running around Pennsylvania saying, no, we're actually totally for fracking. Everything we said during the campaign, we didn't mean that during the primary stage. And we said we were going to ban fracking and get rid of all fossil fuel. That gives you a clue that they realize their internal polls show them in major trouble outside of Philly. And for folks who don't know, Philly's about half the vote in Pennsylvania. And the other half is Pittsburgh, is the rest of the state, which is Pittsburgh, is Scranton, Erie, and a bunch of rural small towns. And that's the area that trended massively Trump. And what the voter registration data tells us, as well as the presidential primary participation data.
That's right. I was going to bring that up too.
Both of those data points are saying Pennsylvania is trending more Trump than it was in 2016.
And it is turning out, and I'll tell some people, this is why weeks ago I was saying, Robert, that Pennsylvania was looking like his strongest blue wall state, which shocked me. I thought it may be one of the harder ones. I actually thought it would probably go Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and then Michigan, leaving Minnesota aside, because I think that Minnesota was a lost opportunity last time for Donald Trump. But in any event, I was shocked how well he was performing in Pennsylvania because something's happening. So they're losing all of these registrations, and you would think, well, the crossover vote will be smaller this time. It's not. So something is going on where Trump is still taking about 12% of their base, yet he is starting from a net gain, baseline position. So I think we're up to around 150,000 net statewide now. So one of these areas where I'm looking at, Democrats really wanted this, Robert. Susquehanna, Lackawanna, not looking good. Luzerne, that's a freaking catastrophe for them. This is the most latest data. We'll get one more update before the election. Yeah, we'll get one more. Erie was another one, Robert. Obama and Biden carried Erie over Mitt Romney by 16 points. Donald Trump flipped it. He won it by 2. He's probably going to carry it by 3 or 5 now. So that's just what that's my, that's my.
Which leads me back to another key point is not only is there a realignment between metropolitan America and middle America, what I loosely call middle America, small town America, but the other part is the polling. The metropolitan folks are the ones rushing to participate in polls. And like, here's the problem if you're not considering geography. So for folks that don't know out there, Richard was one of the first people to highlight geography to me, which is in terms of polling data. If you do a poll and you look at, say, suburbs, and you want 1/3 of the statewide poll to be suburbs, if most of those suburbs come from Philly, you're getting a wrong number because the suburbs in Erie, the suburbs in Scranton, the suburbs in Pittsburgh are not trending Democratic.
And even Allegheny,
some of them are trending Republican.
Even Allegheny, which is that was another really stunning result. We'll only
not enough hipsters.
Look at York, Robert. Look at York. That was going to Democrats, or at least they thought, in 2018. And there's something that happened there. And in Minnesota, we're really going to point out where they came from. There was like 250,000 white working class males that just didn't bother showing. So everybody's like, oh my God, it was a bloodbath for Republicans in Minnesota. It was not even close to this. They will vote for Donald Trump. They are not going to go out and vote for anybody.
And for people on the House vote area, the House vote was inflated in terms of its public margin because
Sure. Yeah.
Republicans disproportionately did not compete in a bunch of districts.
That's
So
right.
when you adjust for that, the median House vote was +7 Democratic nationwide. So it wasn't 8.5 or 9. But if you look at where most of that +7 came from compared to the 2016 vote, it was ancestrally Democratic working class voter groups. So to give you an example, one of the things I like to do as a pop quiz to people is tell me which state had the most Democrats overperformed the most. And it happens to be a state where they didn't pick up any seats because of it. It's West Virginia. I mean, they ran 20 to 25 points ahead of Trump's margin there. That tells people, okay, that kind of voter is not going to vote Joe Biden.
They're not.
So they were just ancestral Democrats. A good number of the Trump independents simply did not vote. And then a whole bunch of Trump Democrats went back to the Democratic Party when they voted for the House in 2018. They're not going to do that at the presidential level. It ain't happening. And so that's where voter registration data and presidential primary participation data are very strong indicators. And when we look at Pennsylvania, we see that in Philly itself, we are not seeing any signs of an African-American surge, or in Pittsburgh. We're not seeing a certain millennial turnout voter registration surge. So this new voter myth is just that, a myth. And secondly, what we're seeing statewide is that the massive shift towards Trump outside of Philly is more than doubling the pro-Biden Democratic shift.
It's not even close, Robert. Again, York, look at one. That's a R for people who can't see it. Republicans added an additional over 1,500 to the rolls in York. That's a big shift. And by the way, it looked like it was going to shift a little bit back to the left. That is a race now. It's gone. Look at Cumberland, another nice chunk. This is just one report. My point is, we will get one more, but Cumberland, think back to the special election, Rick Saccone, Connor Lamb, right? Connor Lamb was going to do so well in Cumberland suburbs. Well,
just look at that little county, Forest County. Forest County is a tiny little county right near Forest. That's why it's called Forest. Almost all poor working class whites, heavily historically Democratic county, and now leans Republican. For the first time, I think, ever. That gives people an idea of what's happening. And while that's a small county with small votes, it's a cultural indicator of how that entire voter group, which has much more substantial statewide, is going to vote. Right. So it's why you look at precinct data. So you don't look at precinct data and say, well, if we get 35 more votes out of that precinct, we're going to flip the state. You look at, say, if we get 35 more votes out of that precinct, it means that voter group is going to give us hundreds of thousands of more votes across the state.
Disproportionately, Philadelphia is big over there, Robert. Disproportionately. Look at the Democrat, like you said. Is there a surge in Philadelphia? They got 1,157 net.
Exactly. And that's just the university and upscale sections. If you break it down, they're atrophying margins in working class areas, which are shrinking in Philly, but still exist. There's some southeastern and northwestern precincts that are still working class. That was where there was massive drop off from 2008, 2012, for example. If people want to know how do I figure out what's the working class white precinct in Philly, just look at where all the votes vanished between 2008 and 2012. And if you want to know the African American precincts, mostly northeast Philadelphia, then where Temple University and other places are located, then simply go and look up where turnout surged in 2012. But what's interesting is African American precincts are seeing a slight decline in voter registration, primary participation compared to 2016.
Yeah, especially when you compare the rates. The rate of increase, absolutely, which is not indicative of this. Again, in order to get the electorate that some of these people are forecasting is going to come out, which would be a ridiculous historical electorate, you would have to have a combination. So it's not just enough that white women who used to vote for Mitt Romney abandoned Trump. That's not enough. It's not even enough to have them and then a new surge of younger black voters. There has to be a combination, and you're just not seeing it. Bucks is a big deal. If you guys remember, some of you will watch Inside the Numbers, that when we did the voter registration analysis in Pennsylvania, I said and pointed this out, Robert, and I said we were going to end up here come September. And this is not going to change. Joe Biden's on paper resume is not going to lead to a shift toward Democrats in Bidentown. It's not going to happen. Connor Lamb and Ed Rendell will tell you privately, folks, that Joe Biden needs 3-5 days of counting after the election because he is not going to be able to carry the state without it. They will tell you that privately because of fracking. They know he's going to lose on election night. All right. So they need 3 days to count more votes. Bucks would have been the area where it would have told me Donald Trump has some issues because, like Robert said, those traditional voters that used to be more Republican leaning in the Philadelphia area, they will leave and go to places like Bucks and Berks. And that is padding the Republican margin. Bucks was a big target for Democrats, and nobody's talking about this today, but you know damn well, Robert, they looked at those numbers when they came out and they said, oh no, they were hoping it would look like Delaware, or they were hoping
right. There's like just such a class divide. They're only gaining in professional class. So to give people an example too, in Chester County, they switched from Republican to Democratic county leaders. Whereas, and that's the upper middle class suburban part of west of Philly. Whereas you go up to Lucerne that we were talking about earlier in Lackawanna, they flipped from Democratic local rule to Republican local rule.
Right.
So it's a true realignment is what's happening.
Margins that are, as when I say, I mean by net, right? So the gain in Luzerne for Republicans is almost as big as the gain in Philadelphia for Democrats. So I mean, it's a big deal. So the media will only talk about that, the Chester, right? And Delaware, because Chester's the newest
one. And when
they
say suburbs, that's who they're talking about.
Yeah, they're don't really mean
the big metros, upscale.
Not your suburb.
They're not talking about the rest of suburbia.
Right.
And that's why so voter registration data says Trump's going to do 2 to 3 points better in Pennsylvania than 2016. Presidential primary participation data says he'll do 2 to 3 points better than he did in 2016. Core issues related. There's a big anti-war vote within parts of Pennsylvania. There is a big pro-energy vote in parts of Pennsylvania, and there's a big pro-trade vote or pro-tariff vote in Pennsylvania. All three issues, of course, have been very good Trump issues, and all three of those. And the issue response rate, given historical ancestral narratives, says he's going to do well in Pennsylvania. My forecast is that he wins Pennsylvania by 3 points or more.
Yeah, I'm looking at.
He won't be able to steal it. He needs to win it by 2 points or
more.
Yeah,
he's got to be able to win it by that kind of a margin because did I pull this up yet? I even wanted to show people where is Allegheny. There it is, Robert. Look at Allegheny. For those of you who don't know Allegheny, that's the Democrats' only other stronghold in the state of Pennsylvania, right? Because there's Pittsburgh there, and what Robert and I are saying is the gains in the inner cities and the metro burbs are just not enough to outweigh because the shift to the Republican from
those kind of cities, those medium-sized cities, like to give people an example, why did Ohio and Iowa trend so heavily Trumpish more so than the other states? And the reason is simple. Iowa and Ohio don't have a big metropolis. They don't have a metropolitan culture pushing Democratic. So Ohio has Cleveland and Cincinnati. They're very middle America cities. Iowa is all middle America. Whereas, and Wisconsin has a little bit with Madison and Milwaukee, but not a lot. Minnesota has a big one, and the Minneapolis is a very cultured metropolitan place. Philadelphia for Pennsylvania, Detroit for Michigan, and those cities are between 40 and 50% of the total vote out of those states. That's what allowed the Democrats to stay so close in those states when the rest of those states were trending like Ohio and Iowa was trending. The only reason they stayed, the Democrats even had a shot and barely won in Minnesota, was because of the big margins they were able to build out of the affluent suburbs of Minneapolis, Detroit, and Philadelphia. But it wasn't enough because the urban African-American vote in Detroit, Philadelphia, and Milwaukee and Minneapolis was all down.
Yeah.
And I think it will be further down in 2020 than it even was from 2016. I think you're going to see the lowest share. African Americans have the lowest share of the vote they've had since the early 1980s, late 1970s.
We may be generous at 12% right now, Robert. We may be. I'm serious. They're not enthusiastic at all.
I'm at 11 to 11.5%.
Yeah, that would not shock me at all. I was kind of being conservative, but that wouldn't shock me at all because the most enthusiastic voter in 2020 is a rural Trump voter. That is the most enthusiastic, and it's not even close. You saw our polling. It's not even close. Now, there is some anger among that, that post grad kind of, but there's not a lot of help explain to people. There is not a lot of them compared to, like look at Westmoreland. Look at the gain in Westmoreland. That's a finicky area, by the way, for Donald Trump and other Republicans. Some Republicans they'd love, maybe like a Ted Cruz even, but they wouldn't necessarily take to a shot. Just some parts anyway of Westmoreland.
Also some of the German Dutch country that's not far from Pennsylvania Dutch country, as they call it. Not far from Philadelphia had been a Trump skeptical region, but it has been trending Republican.
It has been.
Well,
I'm shocked by that number. That's a big number.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the problem, like especially you get to North Carolina, other than Charlotte and part of the Research Triangle, there's not another part of the state that's trending Democratic. Whereas the rest of the state is trending Republican by 10 points or more in many of the. That's why there's been a 4-point shift towards Republicans amongst registered voters in that state. Anybody pretending North Carolina is competitive is kidding themselves.
They do.
North Carolina is going to be 6 to 7 points for Trump.
They do this every year. They do it every single year.
It's a pipe dream to think North Carolina is competitive.
Florida has that triangle, but they don't have any kind of like Nova suburbs, like DC suburbs. That's what they want for North Carolina, but it's not there. Is my point. It's not that same. It's not Virginia. It's not.
Now you look at,
but it's not.
You look at Minnesota, and you got about half the vote out of Minneapolis and the suburbs. The Iron Range actually has 7 counties, but 4 of them stayed Democratic in 20. But his movement, I mean, he improved 25 plus points in 2016, and that was before he got the mines back and working. The economy has boomed in that region.
Carlton and Lake almost went without.
Correct. And St. Louis is the big one, and it still wasn't very far. I think he'll improve by 10 points or more. That, put it this way, he can probably take about half of the Democratic edge off just by his improvement in the Iron Range statewide. So he lost the state by about 45,000 votes. I think he'll have another net 2025 just out of the Iron Range.
Especially if he does better in St. Louis. There's a lot of
he'll do much
more
better
votes out there.
That's where a lot of the Democratic mayors came out and endorsed him, was St. Louis County. Heavily Norwegian, Swedish, Finnish, decent German, big Italian and Polish populations too. And the economy and the cultural trends make that a heavily trending group. I think the Norwegian parts of the state will trend even more towards Trump in small town Minnesota, so that all he has to do is, as long as Trump doesn't substantially lose ballots in the Minneapolis region from 2016 to 2020, he'll win the state. And I think the rioting effect will keep him even to his 2016 margins. I don't think I think the African-American vote will be down, so that will help him some. And I think in the suburbs, he'll stay about even to what he did. He might even slightly improve on his 2016.
If that's it, that's really the 1-2. So if he comes out with a little bit more than 47%, and the Star Tribune poll had him at 52. I wish they would do another one, but it doesn't really matter anyway, because we're going to have our own soon. But if you look at this, shocked me, because in some states, folks, we don't have records based on, whether it's an open primary and, certain voter registrations. So when we have to infer something, and it's very accurate, right? So an inferred Republican as a Republican or conservative donation. So we're crossing them to see if they have some record with the FEC. Pro-life flags. They have an Anti-Affordable Care Act flag, maybe a Second Amendment supporter flag. Anyone with a Democrat or liberal donation, pro-choice or pro-Affordable Care Act flag is excluded. Now, there's a lot of other data points but these are the major ones. All right. And the reverse is true to be able to infer whether somebody is a Democrat. And then the model basically will tell you, well, we really don't know about any more, right? So it is all, right? Yep, it's all. You can see the gains. I will tell you, I mean, I didn't take any kind of a screenshot to be able to tell you guys what it looked like 2 years ago. All right. Just 2 years ago, it was significantly more Democrat. And even though you can still see all these big globs of blue in St. Louis, right? And Trump won all of this out here. Crow, Wadena, Hubbard, he won all of that.
Oh, man.
He killed it, man.
So if you go north, for everybody, you get much heavier Norwegian population and in particular, but there's also big Finnish, Danish, Swedish populations. But the more Norwegian a county was, to give you an example, what's fascinating is how much it trended just like Wisconsin. If you knew the ancestral history of a county, you could predict both how certain counties in Wisconsin and Minnesota would trend. So going back to Kevin Phillips counties, like you look at your German county in Minnesota, Stearns County moved towards Trump by 16 points. The reason why it didn't move more towards Trump is because you have a substantial number of German Lutheran evangelical Protestants who are already in the Republican alignment. Then you go to the Swedish counties, Chisago County, which is right north of Minneapolis. It moved toward Trump by 19 points. Then you go to the Norwegian county, which is Norman, Minnesota, which is up in the northwestern part of the state.
Right here. I'm trying to do a little wiggle on it.
It moved towards Trump by 25 points between 2012 and 2016. So, and you could, the more Norwegian a county was in Minnesota, just like Wisconsin, the more it trended toward Trump. It was Norwegians the most, the Swedish the second most, Germans the third most. And the reason for that is that Germans have a substantial Lutheran evangelical population.
Political maturation was already underway there.
Exactly. Yeah. There weren't that many votes for Trump to poach. Where the poachable, but there are even more of those poachable votes in Minnesota than he got. So that's where they were, without any effort whatsoever, he almost got the state. This was one of the few states that sort of pushed back in 2018. Colin Peterson is the congressman who represents large parts of that rural part of the state. Nobody ran against him in a hugely Democratic year, and he almost lost as a popular local incumbent.
Right.
Everybody, for the most part, everybody thinks he's dead in 2020. That gives you a sign of what's happening in that state. So all of outside of Minneapolis, basically all of it is going to go Republican. I think the last Iron Range counties are going to go Trump, and I think by a decent margin point, in fact, which means all he's got to do is hold his own compared to 2016. I think the black vote will be down in Minneapolis. So as long as Democrats need to run almost double digits ahead in the suburbs of Minneapolis for them to hold Minnesota.
And good luck with that. And good luck.
Exactly.
And
after all the riots and looting, the epicenter of rioting and looting.
Polls aside, Robert, polls aside, in 2018, Republicans in the House anyway, they lost 40 plus seats, right? They picked up, and a lot of people don't know this because they don't talk about it. It was seen as a good election for Democrats, so nobody ever speaks about the 3 seats that Republicans actually flipped. One was in Pennsylvania, and the other 2, folks, were in Minnesota. And when we ran a little run to basically confirm what somebody in the Star Tribune had said, they were right. There were 250,000 white working class men, his best group, that just didn't come out and vote in 2018. They didn't feel like it. So
because they're Trumpian independents.
They don't.
They definitely didn't care about the Ryanite Republicans.
That's it. And look at how blue these areas are. So what Robert's talking about, poaching, St. Louis, I think Carlton and Lake, if this is the way it's going to go, Carlton and Lake, as blue as you see Carlton here, and in the southwestern corner of Lake, as blue as you see those, he almost took them last time. And with all of the mobilization that's going on now and the outright revolt by local Democrat leaders, there is a revolt out there now, folks.
They thought, for folks who don't know, because the Iron Range is basically heavily steel dependent, China started dumping steel in 2014, 2015. That's what triggered the first rebellion toward Trump.
Yeah.
And then Trump, this is a place where he's delivered in spades.
Yeah.
The economy the part of the region they thought would never recover. The Iron Range was starting to believe they were dead. All of a sudden, within 2 years, even the Star Tribune is having to write articles. A very liberal Minneapolis newspaper saying the Iron Range is taking off.
5% unemployment decline means a lot of money for a lot of families, that article said. That's all. There's no other way to put it. When mining
is good, the whole area is good. For folks who don't know that the big city that's up there, it's not really a big city, but is Duluth. I've had clients and cases up there.
It's over here.
Weather is miserable. If you wonder why all the Norwegians and Swedes and Finns moved there, it's because it reminded them of home. Because it's about I think the average temperature is minus 10 degrees. The summers are nice, but otherwise that is not a desirable place to live, in my experience. But it's old mining country. Charlize Theron played a famous character who was sexually harassed in one of the mines up there. It portrays the underlying culture, very gritty, very tough. The source of democratic farmer labor policies. They go between left populism. Really, they're just left populist, but Trump has embraced the two issues of left populism they care about:
Yeah,
opposition to war
most important ones.
and trade.
Yeah.
And they have benefited more from Trumponomics than literally any other part of the country has been the Iron Range.
And
so,
just to show people how much that blue doesn't matter, look at the central to north central and northwestern part of the state. I mean, this is what it means to Donald Trump. That is the 2016 map. And then that one sole blue county in the southeast, Robert, Olmsted, that could go too. I'm sorry.
And those
the congressional district was bad for Democrats.
Those three pink counties you see next to the blue ones, those are all part of the Iron Range. He flipped those three. Yep. One of my favorite counties is how do they pronunciate it? I gotta get it right.
Don't
Kimochichi. No.
Kuchiching.
That's it. Kuchiching.
I don't ever want to do that.
That's my favorite county. That county moved toward Trump by 30 points.
Yeah, it was a huge
because mining country. Those places are going to move double digits this time, even more. So that's where, when you add up, he can add another 25,000 votes out of the Iron Range, those 7 counties up there. I think he'll flip all of them, other than maybe Cook County. Cook County is a little bit different. It's the last one up there. It didn't trend much.
It's not and it's like,
it's not a big mining county.
It's not big population. The really St. Louis is the one I'm going to be looking at. If he really moves the needle in St. Louis, there are votes up there. And then also
the rest of what's pink in the rest of the state is going to be red. And that's where they need that light blue to be. Democrats need the light blue to become dark blue around Minneapolis.
And I was just going to say, so you have Washington here and Dakota. That's what you see, the 2 light blues around Hennepin, right? If Washington, there's a lot of Democrats here. And by Democrats, Robert and I are talking about those. They are the Democrat voters that are not likely crossover voters. There are a lot of Republicans here, but you would need those independent women, and it's possible. I'm not saying it's not possible. You would need those independent women to say, damn, I am tired of police stations being burnt to a crisp. So I'm going with Donald Trump, and he could take one of those counties, but I think the most likely one to fall would be Olmsted. And then it is possible that you do see Hennepin get bluer. I definitely see that happening.
Yeah, I can see Hennepin getting bluer. I think that but what the Democrats need is they need all 4 of those counties.
They really do.
Bluer.
They need,
and if they
really
don't,
do.
And I think the riots are going to hurt them, both in terms of turnout within the urban core, and in the suburbs, they're going to lose some
Ramsey too
voters that they would have otherwise maybe gotten. These are voters who voted Libertarian or voted for Trump that they would have otherwise got. Trump just needs to hold his own there. He doesn't need to add votes there. In fact, he can lose votes there. He just needs to not bleed too badly.
Get creamed. Yeah. Like in Ramsey, that tiny little one that's right next to Hennepin, that one is, there's a lot of votes there, folks. It's tiny, but there are a lot of votes there. So if he gets, like creamed, then that would offset if he did a lot better in Olmsted and took that and, flipped it from like light blue to medium red, light red. It would erase
those light red, dark red, and flips the Iron Range. He goes in with the Democrats are going to need probably as many as 60, 70, 80,000 more votes than they got in 2016 out of Minneapolis.
Yeah, they would have to squeeze. That's right. They would have, I was thinking 60, 80,000, 60, the bottom line, Robert, bottom line. Any more than 60. And this is why I tell people all the time, polls aside, you just look at the actual numbers, the raw numbers, guys, because you know how he's going to perform
doing polls
among these people.
Exactly. And the problem with Minnesota polls is there's such a divide between the metropolitan population and the whole rest of the state. The whole rest of the state, well, you saw it when you were trying to get, it was almost brutally impossible to get anybody from northern Minnesota to answer any poll.
I finally got a little tip and I couldn't get it. I got a little bit a little bit better in Michigan. That was the last one, but look, after this was that one that the last poll we did.
Look at how much in northern western Minnesota they
completely missing.
So that's why
they don't want to respond.
Whereas Minneapolis, they're happy to answer.
They're dying to tell you their opinion, Robert. They're dying.
Exactly. So that's where the Karens are, and the anti-Karens are in the rest of the state, and that's where that's going to trend heavily And it's a state where the Democrats can only steal so many votes. There's only so many votes to steal out of Minneapolis. It's a little harder to do. There's always been high voter participation across the
It's
board.
a very high participation
Yeah,
state.
it's usually number 1 or 2 in the country every year, every election cycle.
That's right.
So the net effect of it is that there's not a lot of votes to steal there. The trends are overwhelmingly against Democrats, so that they're under maximum pressure. So my view is my current election forecast, I have Trump winning Minnesota by 1.
Yeah, I don't see anywhere outside of Hennepin and Ramsey, Washington and Dakota. And I know there's votes there, but I actually could see some of these outlier suburbs, the Dakotas, right? That would be something that I would not expect to go any bluer for Biden. I think, and so he would offset.
And he needs double-digit numbers there, because I think he's going to be flat out of the urban cores. I think it's going to be slightly down from black precincts.
Yeah,
and basically that means the suburbs he needs to run in terms of margin of victory. So that's 5 points better, 5 points worse for Trump. He needs the margin to be 10 points better than it was for Hillary. And that's going to be very hard, especially in a riot-torn city.
Yeah, and the urban area went for Trump in Minnesota already by a kind of higher margin at 39, right? So that's what the exit polls say anyway. I'm just giving you guys what the exit polls say. And I'm telling you, Trump looks like he's doing 3-4 points better in just about every urban area, which I don't know what else to attribute it to. When we cross it and we nest it, black men. It's working black men. It's not a lot, but it's enough.
The Steve Bannon goal that Trump has always maintained, even though his entire campaign team has not. That's why that's why they're out of money. They spent 35% of the money they raised. They gave back to fundraisers. These fundraisers aren't doing anything. They don't deserve 35%. They should be getting 5%. This fundraising is just texting and direct mail and email. This is not a sophisticated campaign. These aren't people who have special bundlers that they're bringing in big donations. These are just people responding to and a lot of their tweets have been lame.
The grift on the right, Robert, this year is horrible. They're scamming candidates left and right.
It won't matter for Trump, because Trump can loan himself money and then he can pay himself back with campaign donations later. So that's why what people don't realize is this will be the first time a Republican has been even or outspend a Democrat, and honestly, since the 80s.
That's
you could argue about 2000, 2004 were close, depending on how you count outside cash.
Yeah.
But Obama crushed McCain money-wise.
That's right.
Crushed Romney money-wise.
Yep.
Hillary crushed Trump money-wise. And so far, people can go to Open Secrets all across the country. Trump has raised more money so far. Now, the August numbers are not fully in yet for Biden. Biden's probably caught up. But basically, Trump had a 2-to-1 deficit. So
but his burn rate was like 67%. Biden,
yes.
And this month, I don't know what he was trying to catch up with cash on hand, folks. So he's got a lot of, and one of Biden's big problems. It's a good thing this election's, for him anyway, is only 50 plus days away, because you can't keep going back to the guys who give you all the max of contributions. They're done, man. They got to give to your PAC. That's it, because he doesn't have a ground game, a grassroots. Like the donor base for Trump is $20, $40, and whatever. And that's 99 point something % last time we looked in his last quarter was low dollar donations, which is 200 or less. Or no, the last one was about 97. It fell a little bit. So he must have went and got from those. That's those bundlers you're talking about. But the industry standard, folks, is like 30%. The grift in the Republican Party, even that's a lot. The grift in the Republican Party this year, I try to keep my mouth shut, but running and talking to clients, and they're paying this and they're paying that. The grift is criminal, man. It's criminal.
And completely. And I mean, for example, to give you an idea how incompetent the Trump campaign were, they've been off the air for a month in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
They've been off the air since early on. That's ridiculous. There's no reason for that to occur. And while they spent money in places like Texas, which was the most moronic, you did not need to spend money in Texas. Texas was a lock. It was an expensive state to spend in the first place.
Texas is a lot of money. That's why, if you're
losing Texas, you're losing the whole election.
You're done anyway.
Exactly. It's a waste of time. So the people have been incompetent, but in Minnesota, the money spent has been about equal. But another data point, if you go to like Open Secrets, they monitor where people get donations in certain markets. And in Minneapolis, Minnesota last time, Trump was outraised 5-1 by Hillary out of Minnesota donors. This time, he's outraised Biden so far.
Really?
Now, Biden may have caught up after August, because the August numbers aren't
It's
fully
going to be
reported
big.
yet.
Yeah. I heard it's going to be huge. I did hear it's going to be
It was
big.
close to 400 million apparently.
Yeah, that's right.
So
Yeah.
he raised as much in 1 month as he had raised his whole campaign to that point.
Yeah.
So and Trump probably raised half that. But so he's probably ahead in Minnesota. But just the fact that the money is even in a state that was 5-1 Democratic donor shows that Minnesota is and compared to the average, Minnesota donors trended more towards Trump than the country as a whole did. So it's another behavioral data point. If Minnesota has a bunch of Democrats eager to vote for Joe Biden, why aren't they giving money to Joe Biden like they did Hillary Clinton?
Yeah.
And so all the data points out of Minnesota point to Trump doing better there than 2016. And like I said, at this point, I see him winning by 1, and I don't think voter fraud will be a big issue there because of Minnesota's history and because
high
of
participation.
High participation already existing. There's only so many votes they can steal out of the state.
Where would you say it would come from? Hennepin, right?
Normally
I didn't look at Minnesota
in the old days. In the old days, you would do it in Democratic farmer labor strongholds.
Yeah, but there are none out there for him anymore.
That's their problem. Yeah, if you controlled all of the northern counties, you could stack some votes,
right?
But they can't. So they're stuck. Basically, it's Minneapolis and St. Paul, Hennepin and Ramsey.
Okay,
those are the only counties and they're not. Those counties don't.
Curious.
They fancy themselves Swedish style Democrats there. So
right.
They don't think of themselves as the kind of people who would do that. So they don't have. So that's why they'll have much more difficulty doing that.
Let's do Hennepin and Ramsey just for curiosity, because some of these are absolutely horrible. So when you look at like Philadelphia, they have a lot of votes they can write in, buddy. I mean, that's it.
Oh, yes.
Pretend like they're not.
Philly has a long history of it.
I mean, this is absurd, Robert. The most absurd song and dance I've heard this year is that, we've had people work for the Treasury Department, leak top secret financial reports. We've had people who work for NSA leak top secret intelligence reports. We've had a guy who worked for 2 decades on the Senate Intelligence Committee, leak to the New York Times, to hurt Donald Trump with that political investigation. I mean, nobody, not one profession has demonstrated themselves unwilling to break the law to get this guy. And we're supposed to pretend like local rabid anti-Trump activists aren't going to vote ring when they've been doing it in those wards for years and years. Come on.
The two high risk for Trump, if I was preparing his legal strategy, would be Pennsylvania and Michigan.
Yeah.
Because you have Democratic governors.
Yes.
Big Democratic metropolitan areas in Detroit and Philadelphia. And histories of voter fraud in both Philadelphia and Detroit. So those are your three. Those 2 states are his high risk for a stolen election. Those states he needs to win by 2 or more. But in Minnesota, and this is why if I were him, I would focus heavily on Minnesota and Wisconsin. Those states don't have the same history of voter corruption. Everybody there fancies themselves a clean ethics, good government type. Yeah. They don't have the history of old school political machines. The rural political machines that used to have strength have completely broken down on the Democratic side in both states. So like in Milwaukee, the only place you can in Wisconsin, the only place you can steal votes out of is Milwaukee. And it's hard to steal that many votes out of Milwaukee. And the same is true in the Twin Cities. It's hard to steal that many votes out of the Twin Cities.
Well, both. Did you see that? I mean, with both Ramsey and Hennepin, you're only looking at when, because just for people who maybe don't follow along and see what we do, but when going to the voter file, it is by default because that's the industry standard. You exclude people who are dead. You exclude people who have a change of address or a change of name flag because they're no longer eligible to vote, or at least, obviously, if you're dead, you're not. But some of them have questionable records where they would at least have to prove their identity and go through some kind of verification process. So when we're polling, those people are immediately removed from the voter file list. We're not going to call people we know are dead. We're not going to call people who may have moved to Wisconsin last year. So we just leave them off. But those records are still there for those people in the machine cities where they want to turn the spigot on and turn the spigot off. So that's why when you see people ridiculously holding back votes for 8 hours, 6 hours, they're counting, folks, how many votes they need to fill in. I'm done pretending like this doesn't happen, Robert. I'm finished. They can call me whatever they can want to call me. I've been watching it since I was 18 years old in Asbury Park, New Jersey. All right. They're not going to play me on this issue. This has been happening forever, and it is going to be worse this year with this mail-in vote, no doubt. But between Ramsey and Hennepin, We're looking at, before that, it was 1,058,000 records. With adding those voters, we're looking at 1 million, or not even voters. They're just records that are still on the rolls. We call them the dirty rolls. Adding the dirty rolls, we're at 1,122,000. So we're looking at about 64,000 dirty rolls between those two counties. Still
and that's
a lot.
Small. A lot overall, but
significant.
But compared to your Philadelphias and your Detroit,
which is 1 million alone. Correct. Alone, folks. Alone.
Very, very different. There's not enough votes to steal out of there. And you don't have people that have a history of doing it. That's the other problem.
Wayne County, which does 800,000, Robert. Very easy to overtake.
And for people who want to track it, just track what happened in 2016. They got caught in Wayne, got partially caught in Philly, but caught bad in Wayne. Where they tried to do the recount, and they had precincts that had more votes than voters.
And folks, there's almost no argument that Hillary Clinton, so we always say, wow, Donald Trump only won by 10,000 votes. Donald Trump won by more than 10,000 votes.
He won by 100,000. They just didn't steal enough out of it. They couldn't steal enough from Detroit.
Broward County, Florida was not the only county in the state of Florida it was not an innocent reason that it was the only county where she squeezed out more votes than Barack Obama. Come on, guys. Oh, yeah. If there was going to be a surge, you would have seen it in the other counties where Hillary Clinton carried and did well, more than carried, but that didn't happen because only Brenda Snipes was willing to do that.
What's the party profile currently? Party lean for Minnesota.
Minnesota. This is the shocking thing, Robert. Obviously, Minnesota has got a D lean, but when we let's run this, because this is what I was stunned here. Let me get rid of take the dead people back off the.
You're excluding two great Democratic groups.
I know here. I know. So they'll be screaming at me that it's not fair, right? They'll be screaming at me that it's not fair.
Exactly. Yeah. Unfair sampling.
Oh, I just got rid of it. Let me put it back up. So in 2018, because I clicked it trying to compare it, in 2018 or 2016, I'm sorry, Democrats were only about a 2-point edge, which actually is about right now in the beginning of the era of Donald Trump. Okay. But what happened? Oh, I did open secrets here. Let me get my Aristotle up. I don't want to tell you. I know it. It's in my head. I want people to see so they don't think I'm full of it. It's like that. So it was about a 2-point edge for Democrats. I think 35, 33, something along those lines. Because Minnesota is funny with voter registration by party, the best thing we could do is infer by their vote history and infer by their donations, things like that. I just clicked on Michigan. And there's actually a slight Republican edge there. Now, there's a lot of others. So when you include those people that really cannot be modeled, okay, then that would probably leave it around, a slight Democrat edge. But it was stunning to me.
+8, because that's, by the way, what the media pollsters are presuming.
Yeah, that's not gonna happen, Robert. Here, I know it is hard here, and it's not. It would be valid for somebody to say, well, you can't exactly peg it like that. It would be valid for them to say that because there's so many of those unknowns we simply don't know. Here's unknown makes up 28%. Exit polls really only have independent. Oh, yeah, the exit poll last time was 28%. So what we're seeing is basically a reverse. So 33 Democrat, 38.5. I ran this after I came up with this result.
It's the same as Wisconsin, isn't it?
It really is. It's getting closer to Wisconsin now. Only that unknown vote is not as Democratic. Yeah. So it's worse for Democrats than you would think. However, I was making some calls trying to get an understanding of this. This really isn't inferred Republican. This really is inferred Trumplican because the vast majority of the donations that move these people into inferred Republican, which is making sense to what you said about open secrets. The vast majority are to either Trump's campaign or Trump's what are those, the joint committees he's got set up, and there's like 4 or 5 entities or something that belongs to that. So if you look at one single entity, they belong in the banner of the Trump campaign in one form or another. And then also the second largest is pro-gun, which could skew this result a little bit because immediately the model will say those are Republicans, right? But that's not always the case. You know this area well. Up in that 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 northern part of the state, there's a lot of people they're Democrat, they're ancestral Democrats, but they still are pro-gun. But when we map them, ironically, it's kind of funny because when we map them, we do what we did before and we look at them by party, which is what I was showing everybody. It's not as unrealistic as you may think, coming off with, oh, wow, R+4. It's not as unrealistic. Now, when you ask those people to lean, which we're doing, it's really what we're getting is around 21%, which is why I'm a little bit shocked when I looked at the exit polls just now. Independents were 28 in 2016. Democrats were 37. Republicans were 35. And what I could do is do a vote history, a model, a target to, now that's let's do a turnout probability model just let's play, for what's and giggles here, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say no lower than 50, no higher than 100. So, and a presidential general election. So what we're trying to say right here is that they are at least 50% likely to vote. Okay. If we do that again, I'm curious to see what the difference is. Let it go. I wonder how much of those, it's going to roll and do its thing. It's going to query the database. Only about 500,000 voters dropped off. Let's rerun the report, which by the way, is roughly a presidential electorate for Minnesota, 3 million and right?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
It was almost exactly. It was a little bit. I think maybe a little below 3 million. There were around 3 million voters.
Yeah. So, okay. A little bit below 2.94. That's what I just looked at. I'm curious to see what it is now. See, that actually grows the Republican edge. So that tells me this unknown group is probably a little bit more left, maybe even more left than Wisconsin, actually, Robert. It may be they may be a little bit more left wing.
That's the thing is, even if you make that adjustment, what you're seeing is that
could be
that Minnesota may be more Republican than Wisconsin is in 2020.
Which is what I've been trying to say for years, that in truth, guys, I absolutely could see Donald Trump losing Michigan, losing Wisconsin. Maybe Joe Biden has a great night out west and he plucks off Arizona or something, right? But it doesn't matter because Donald Trump's going to be extremely difficult to beat in the state of Florida. He's not losing North Carolina. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and North Carolina, Florida, Georgia, they're not competitive.
They're not. It's not happening. And then he could pluck off like Minnesota and Pennsylvania, and
or Minnesota and New Hampshire,
or Minnesota and New Hampshire. Which, by the way, I got a lot of pushback on the other day for some reason. When I don't know why. But
that's because they're thinking of New Hampshire as those suburbs along the Massachusetts border and not the whole rest of the state, the rest of that state, again, very rural, small town state. No, other than the sort of Boston exurbs, really, it's very much a rural suburban state, small town state. It's not, and it's Minnesota. My brother lived in Minneapolis for many years, in St. Paul. I had cases in Minnesota, went to law school in Wisconsin. And I grew up spending summers in New Hampshire. So they're all states I have familiarity with, friends and family from those places and locations while growing up in Tennessee and living in Nevada. And New Hampshire has aspects that are a lot like Minnesota in terms of they're very idiosyncratic, independent, anti-war, pro-trade voters that otherwise lean Democratic. On a lot of economic, social safety net kind of issues. More so Minnesota than New Hampshire in that regard. There's a big anti-tax sentiment in New Hampshire. But otherwise, there's similar trends. So I see New Hampshire as trending in the same way Minnesota does, as being more Trumpian than 2020 than compared to the rest of the states. So right. I have New Hampshire and Minnesota both being added to the Trump electoral vote column, and maybe easier than Wisconsin or Michigan.
Yeah, there's just this group in Wisconsin that is not very friendly to Donald Trump, and they hated Hillary Clinton. So, it was a little bit of a shock. But Minnesota's rougher than Wisconsin, right? Would you agree? That most of the state.
Well, usually Minnesota is about 3 points more Democratic than Wisconsin, but I think this year it's going to be about equal. Now, I think what helps Wisconsin is it's a 2/3 rural small town state. Only about a third of the vote comes out of Milwaukee,
which is a reason for some of these big misses, by the way.
Correct. And Marquette, by the way, another poll out today, smaller leads than they ever had for Hillary. They have for Biden.
That's right. So what do they have? 4 and 3 or something? Yeah, and then the register versus likely.
Exactly. And he's still missing small town rural voters in the North. So
At least he's being honest, though, by the way. At
Oh,
least
completely. He's very
he's putting it out.
forthcoming,
And he's
very
like, look,
transparent. He's really not trying to manipulate the data. He's not trying to structure a narrative. He just has certain limits of polling.
that's right.
And the fact that he has it between 3, 4, and 5 over in his last 3 polls means that when he normally had it between 6 and 8 in 2016, tells me Wisconsin's going to go about 2 to 3 points for Trump. I think Michigan is tougher because Joe Biden still has a positive halo effect from saving
the auto bailouts.
The auto industry in 08, 09, 2010. That's why Michigan is tougher. But that's why I think Pennsylvania is going to go Trump by 2 to 3, Wisconsin, Trump 2 to 3, Minnesota, Trump 2 to 3, Iowa and Ohio by 8 to 10. Those states are not competitive.
I don't see it. I don't see
competitive. I'll give Rasmussen credit. They put out whatever their poll is, even if their poll is an outlier, even if their poll turns out to be substantially in error. It's very tough to poll those states because, again, they're very small townish in terms of their votes, not a big metropolitan vote in either state. But those states are truly not competitive. And by the way, you know this because Democrats are spending almost no time or money, Biden's campaign in Ohio or Iowa.
You got to give that to Tom Bevan, too, by the way, saying, look, I'm at Real Clear Politics. I know what the polls say, but I'm telling you, look where Joe Biden is going. He is defending very blue states. So
it's all Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin.
Michigan, Wisconsin. Right. Come on. He would be, if he really thought he could take Arizona.
Like if he really thought that he was doing better in Florida or Arizona, he'd be down there. He's not in either one.
And look real quick at that profiled voters, that Second Amendment supporters, 28.8%, folks, right off the top. That probably does inflate the Republican inference right there. I'm almost sure of that, but it wouldn't be. Let me just say this: what I'm doing, because when we wait for the demographics, I would not be surprised. Let me put it this way: I would not be surprised if we see an electorate in Minnesota that is more Republican than we've ever seen. And I mean that in straight party split. So it was only D+2 in 2016. Like Robert said before, the pollsters, to get the numbers they're getting right now, what was the last? It was like D+10 or something. I mean, these are extremely.
PP has a D+8.
Who did it?
PPP.
Okay.
And there's lots of issues in history with them.
Yes, there is. Talk about really a problem.
Yes. But to his credit, all he did was he admitted what they're all doing. What all the media and institutional narrative pollsters are doing.
That's true.
They heard, like, I'll tell everybody in advance, you watch, they're going to herd throughout the election. Biden's going to be up around 7 because that's what they know the real 2008 Democratic House margin is. And they're just going to stick around that number. So they'll see some at 9 or 10, some at 3, 4 to 5, 9 to 10.
Amen to that.
They're going to herd around 7. And the difference is PPP, they just admitted it. They're like, this is all a game, and we'll see who games it better. And the rest. I do like that now and then they'll throw in a funny poll. Like they'll say, they'll throw in a fictional candidate and see what people do, and they'll ask crazy questions that are funny. They also, to their credit, are one of the last pollsters to still try to go after landlines. But he has always manipulated his numbers. But his mistake was he admitted it basically to Nate Cohn. And the reason why he got outed and sort of disowned by the Nate Silver establishment is he admitted what they were all doing. And sort of exposed what they're all doing. And just because he had a dissident view of a particular race is why they came after him. He's like, everybody's just trying to stick a number to
otherwise they would have let it go, Robert, because while we're on the topic of blowing up other pollsters, since everybody smears the hell out of me, I'm just going to say what I know, and I'm just going to start throwing bombs. All right, Patrick Murray at Monmouth, I know somebody who worked for him. All right, I know another pollster who leads a competing university firm, and she went to go work for him. And they told me that he completely fudged his numbers in 2016. And I will use the words that he used when he was relaying the story. He kept putting his thumb on the scale. He puts his thumb on the scale. He knew damn well that Donald Trump was ahead in Ohio. He knew damn well that it wasn't going to be competitive in Iowa. He was doing it on purpose. And what she said, which was a girl that worked for him and went over to another, what she said was that They would just try, and it is the downsides. There are benefits to every collection mode, and then there are downsides to every collection mode. And the downside to live caller, folks, is that you just cannot reach. You'll get, like we were talking about, you will get liberal leaning groups. They're dying to talk to you. They want to tell you their opinion. And it's inherent in that data collection mode. It's an artifact of that mode. You will miss more Republican leaning groups. And they were constantly saying, Patrick, we don't have it. We don't have it. We don't have it. We need more of this. We need more of that. So he would take, and this is how it was explained to me. So maybe he only got maybe 50 responses of men aged 30 to 45 or whatever it is, right? So you would say, let's just copy and paste, double that up, and that's it. I got 100 now. That is what they were doing. So if everybody wants to smear me, I can blow it up. All right. Also, anytime you see somebody say, I pulled a random sample from a voter file, the list was 10,000 big or whatever, 20,000, and they claim to get a sufficient sample size, they are full of crap. The general rule of thumb is 6-1. They sure as hell didn't reach anybody 18 to 29 if they pulled a small list a list that small. We in Florida, it's 100,000, Robert. All right. And then because we are native Floridian pollsters, we just started applying that philosophy everywhere. So yeah. I will give this to Robert Cahaley at Trafalgar. I'll give him a lot. He's right. Bigger samples are better samples. He put that a lot better than I've ever been. I heard him in an interview the other day, and I have always tried to explain that a little differently. He dumbed it down, made it nice and easy to say, but you cannot extrapolate to compensate for having an insufficient sample size. You can't do it. You will mess up. Maybe you'll get lucky. Maybe you will get lucky. For the most part, you will not. And your poll will be wrong. And that's why it's wrong, because you tried to compensate for not having sufficient samples. So if we're going to poll Iowa, relatively small state, I'm still going to go 6-1. So if I need 500 responses from the phones or whatever that mode of collection, however we're breaking it down, could be 50-50, could be 80-20. It'll be at least 6-1. And I will almost assure you, which Laura hates because it means more money, I always go and pull more. I always do. I just do because I don't like it. So I'm targeting 500 and maybe I got 480. Well, I'm going to go back and I'm going to overdo it. And I'm going to pull a lot. I may pull, if I know I got 480 responses by pulling 50 or 60,000, I'll probably go and pull another 40 just to be on the safe side, even though my target originally was 500. Because what you get, folks, is duplicate responses. Like I showed you on the map the other day. This is 1,000. This is 2,000. Those are duplicates. You're not really seeing the place fill in anywhere, right? It wasn't until I started to, oversample where I could fill in some of the northern areas. That is the way it goes. And then when you're polling and you say, like the Epoch Times poll is 2,169 likely voters. We polled 3,000 and change. But that's what it comes down to, because when you apply weighting variables, you're just getting you're oversampling a ton of groups, but those groups have to be correctly represented. So your poll is not really 3,000 responses. It's just not. That's not how it works. And I keep seeing a whole lot of people do that. All right. And some guys I like, but I see them do it all the time, man. And they'll try to pull this crap that they got 200 responses in the 18 to 29 category by conducting a poll through IVR and pulling a voter file of like 15,000. No, you didn't. No, you did not, you liar. You did not. You'll be lucky. Whatever the list size is that you pull, you'll be lucky if 10% pick up the phone. And then you'll be lucky if 10% of that finish your interview. All right. That's how low these rates are at this point. And Cahaley's also right about that. So he'll put up that response rate, the participation rates. It's always in the ones. It's small, folks. It's tiny, very tiny. So that's why you'll see with me, that's why I'll always tell you what am I doing? I am going to this email thing right here, has an email. So I'll match it to the individual. We'll pull that. And then there's other ways to try to reach them too. Cell phone to like texting to cell phone. We're getting a lot of, I don't know if you want to call it luck. We're just having a lot of success when we're missing those younger people, to text them a link and just say, a quick introduction, and that introduction reads exactly like this. Let me jump to page 1. That introduction will read like this. We are conducting a brief political survey for a national media organization. Your participation is voluntary, vital, and appreciated. All of the information you provide will be confidential, and your responses are anonymous. The interview will only take a few short minutes to complete. Please click here, whatever. And you'd be lucky if you get, 5% to click on, or 2%, 3%. But at least those younger people seem to participate more in that. When you do that with the boomer generation, they'll do it, man. They don't know what they're clicking, and they click it. But for the most part, a lot of other people are skeptical, and that's just the way it is, So you just have to figure out which mode is better to reach which group, and you have to be able to adjust that mid-flight. Like, you can't take off with the plane, right? Fly your course and then land and assess, because the flight is over, So your budget is not infinite, and the duration that you should be in the field is not infinite either. You have 4 days, 5 days to be respectable, and that's it. And you got to get out. So you have to have the ability to look at it mid-flight and say, you know what? I need a course correction. Something's not going right. And like Robert brought up before with the Epoch Times poll in the beginning, a couple of first days, the Republican sample was so young, so non-white. It was totally ludicrous. So we had to adjust with one of the other ones we were doing. And then I went right to this because I just, we work with a lot of other people. We work with, vendors. We have different vendors. But in the end, sometimes they just fail me, and I mean, that's it. They just fail me, but I liked some of them because I can data append. So they work with that voter file company we were just showing everybody. And I can say, hey, do me a favor. Here's respondent ID X _421- whatever. And that will link to that's their API ID in the voter file. So when they work together like that, Aristotle knows what the API ID is, and they can pass it to the panel and say, okay, this person is, yes, that is so-and-so. And so-and-so voted this much, right? And they live in a rural area. They live in area is a little bit harder, but region, census regions, very easy. We have different census, the 4, the 9, whatever. So you can data append later. And while that's coming in, the great ability to export in real time to a Google spreadsheet is fantastic, because that's what goes to MarketSite, which you've seen conducting polling with us, right? So, and MarketSite is just the best tool. It's God's gift to pollsters. All right, I'll give a quick pitch to MarketSite, which was bought by Dynata now. But that is what allows you to say, okay, how many men do I have? How many female? 53-47 main. It's not good enough. That's not good enough anymore, folks. You need to nest that with how many men are Republican and where do they live? And it's beyond what everyone is trying to sell to you right now as sufficient data collection. It's not. And they all know it, man. They all know it, guys. This is not an industry secret. They know that they're that they're not providing the best product that they could. Most people, I would say, probably are trying, but I just get a little bit. I'm at the point now where I just don't care anymore. I don't see anybody running to defend me, man. So right, where are those people standing up? Nope, nowhere. So
I think
it.
To a certain degree, since 2012, when response rates cratered for public opinion polling, a lot of people in the polling industry panicked. And then after Gallup and Pew both exited presidential polling at a meaningful level, Pew still does it but doesn't push it. Gallup doesn't do it at all. There was a great concern that polling was going to become a profession that people wouldn't utilize. And so instead, that's where the media sort of made a bargain through the Nate Silvers of the world to use pollsters for a different reason, which was to try to shape the narrative rather than reflect and represent the narrative. And I think that's where a lot of the fear factor comes in, and that's what I was telling you, like, even if you were just a pollster, you weren't an election forecaster, you need to know the ancestral history and psychological motivations of different voter profiles, because the way you know that it's significant that you don't have a certain sample from the rural part of, say, Minnesota, is because they're voting that in order for a poll to be, you talk to one person and that one person to be representative of 1 million people in that state or 100,000 people in that state, you need to know who is actually representative by certain demographic traits that you can make sure that you've weighted correctly against the actual electorate. So you're taking that, say, 1,000 people you talk to in Minnesota, and you're saying, here's how I think 3 million are going to vote. And that's because within that 1,000, different ones represent 100,000, 100,000, 100,000.
That's right.
But you can only know to look for that as a pollster if you know what you're supposed to be looking for within groups. And so that's why when you're, say, the Marist poll, and you don't realize that working class rural voters are voting totally differently than upscale South Beach voters, you don't know to make sure that you haven't underweighted and they make sure that you needed to have oversampled rural blue collar voters. I mean, by the way, the fact that Marist has Florida tied means Trump's up by 5 or 6.
Yeah, no kidding.
Biden should just.
That's why he's not even there.
Don't waste a dime. This race is a 4-state race. Maybe Arizona and Nevada. Maybe. I think it'll be tough in Nevada, a bit of a reach. Arizona, I don't think is quite as competitive. It's a hard state to poll. I think it's trended Democratic, but Biden needs to move that number by 4 points off of 2016. I don't see that happen.
I agree.
I see maybe 2 points, 1.5, but not 4. So
Maricopa, man, I just don't. These polls coming out, Biden's up by 8 in Maricopa.
Well,
Robert, that's crazy, man.
And if we go back to presidential primary participation, Trump outpolled Biden, even though he was an uncompetitive primary. Not only did he, to give people an idea, nationwide, even though several states canceled their primaries, Trump got almost as many votes as Biden got nationwide.
Yep.
Historically, whenever the incumbent has got more votes than the challenger, the incumbent has won almost every time. And Trump is the first Republican ever to poll as many votes when in an uncontested presidential primary as the Democrats did. It's utterly unheard of. Yeah. But in Wisconsin, he got about 30,000 more votes than Biden did. Now, Minnesota had a heavy Democratic turnout, but that was earlier in the stage, and Klobuchar was on the ballot and all of that jazz. But
Super Tuesday.
But Biden did get more votes. So on that side, though, the Democratic overall primary participation wasn't fantastic. And we don't have a good baseline for Minnesota because they used to be a caucus state. Yeah. So but from a primary participation rate, Arizona and Florida do not show signs of trending towards Biden at all. So and there is more data. Not only is it now clear the Cubans and Venezuelans are trending heavily Trump.
They are always so far behind, Robert. They had no idea why Miami-Dade looked like that. They were clueless. Yeah. The Dave Wasserman who just blocked you, he was totally clueless. I informed him on that, and then he took 2 days.
He was using the Charlie Crist poll.
He's such
Florida to say that Florida was going to vote for Biden by double digits.
Go ahead, knock yourself out with that, man. Make yourself look as foolish as possible. Please. I mean, please do. Yeah. Before we do, let's take, and Florida's big, so it's going to do a spin for a little bit, but let me just explain to people. And Democrats did suffer a bit of a blow here in Florida that they lost the Amendment 4 argument, So basically what that boiled down to was the judge said, listen, if you're on probation, and I am for people earning their right back. If you pay your debt to society, you've paid your debt to society. So I am for that. I'm just not for it the way Democrats are for it. All right. And we did have an executive clemency process before. It just wasn't good enough for them because it really meant paying your debt to society. And when you're still on probation, let's say you get out and you're on parole or you're on probation. If you don't pay your court costs and your restitution fees, you have not paid your debt. So you're not off. And if you don't pay it, you could be violated and sent back because those non-payment of court fees, non-payment of restitution, failure to participate in drug, testing, whatever it is that you've been ordered to do, you must finish that paper first, folks. And you got to pay the paper to get free. All right. So it made no sense for Democrats to argue that they should get the right to vote back before they were at no risk of being violated. So they could have gotten under the Democrat what they wanted was they wanted people to be able to vote. And then a month later, some of those people could have been violated and sent back to jail for violation of probation because they didn't pay something or comply with some of their remaining, orders in one way or the other. And the judge didn't see it their way. And the judge was like, look, if you can be violated and sent back to jail, then you really aren't there yet. You need to be free and clear. And that's so they lost what they estimate to be about 1.4 million. I don't know that that was going to pan out anyway. Some of the data that we saw early anyway, folks, was not good for Democrats. So black voters who were applying and going through the process were only about 80% Democrat. White ex-felons that were applying were actually majority Republican registrations. So it doesn't always go the way you think it's going to go, especially in a state like Florida that's a little bit more Republican. Ideologically, it's more conservative. And then here we have, let's run this analysis report. Let me just check real quick because I know we're going to have a high number. So there's a 14.7 million records, 12.7 and a half that are not dead or recent change of address flags. So good goes to show you how many ballots they want to be able to play with. But let's run this, and you'll see the
problem in Florida is they needed Gilliam to win.
They really did. Yeah, because Ron is not playing. He's not playing. And after what happened with Brenda in Broward County, I don't know that anybody's going to be willing. And by the way, what's her name got swept up in Miami-Dade too, or Palm Beach.
Exactly.
So yeah,
that's why I think Democrats. Yeah, my guess is you'll see Biden may never travel to Florida in October.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Right. Look, there's a 2-point spread between Republicans and Democrats. If we round 37-35 in 2016, actually in 2018, which was a great year for Democrats, it was R+1, the Florida electorate. And that's simple. And I just want to show this is the big net. This is the smallest advantage that Democrats have had since partisan ID was tracked. They started tracking affiliation, registration by affiliation, by party. This is the slimmest majority they've had since 1972 when they started. And then if we simply do a vote history, I don't even want to do the propensity score because I'm going to try to be nicer to them. So turnout probability, presidential, let's just do 50, 100. So it's at least 50% likely. In 2016, it was the partisan split was, I want to say it was D+2. Nope, it was R+1. So again, same thing in 2018 in a great year for Democrats, or supposedly a great year, right? So that should tell you that Florida is actually getting more Republican because really,
if you look at the voter registration data, you have about other than Orlando and Miami, where you have and Gainesville, where you have Democratic voter registration trends, the whole rest of the state is moving so heavily Republican, particularly in working class areas, that Republicans have trimmed about a point and a half off the voter registration edge Democrats have had in just 4 years.
Yep.
And that's because now in Florida, only about 20 to 25% of your vote is small town. But the key is that Florida is like a microcosm for the rest of the country, and that you have these big mega cities, metropolises, like the Orlando region and Miami region, from a voter registration perspective, trending Democrat. The reason why it's not showing up in polls in Miami is because within that group, they're trending heavier Trumpish, Colombians and Venezuelans, et cetera. But in terms of voter registration, they're trending Democrat. But Tampa is not. Tampa's about even. It's not moving. Jacksonville's not moving much. The Southwest Florida is not moving much. Collier County's actually trending Republican
heavily.
So you're seeing some Panama City heavily trending Republican. Daytona heavily Volusia County trending Republican. The whole, one of the keys of the Marist poll was that basically the Space Coast is about 10 points more Trumpish than they had it in 2016. And that was, by the way, Marist had only 60% of the state vote being white when it's going to be.
I was just going to point that out. I was just going to point that out, that if you look at this, folks, once we did that turnout probability modeling, which was conservative, I did not do, we're looking at about R+1, right? About where the last two elections have been, R+1, and the exit polls continue. This is why Marist too, they're screwing up, man. Exit polls continuously show, and they did in 2016, that the white vote was 62%. It was not. Do the math yourself. It's basic math, folks. It was about 66%, 68 if you're, really crunching. I'm looking at that Hispanic vote. That's going to go, probably to like 17. They don't even, because they're going to 18. They're going to think that's good for them. Right. I'm telling you. Marist see all the Frank Lunces on Twitter.
Maris's own poll had Trump ahead amongst Florida Hispanics.
That's
why it was even.
That's right. And I'm also calling BS on the fact that Biden's going to do that good among white voters. I'm calling BS.
It's because they again, Marist refuses to reweight for education. So even Nate Cohn very quietly criticized
there you
the
have
Pennsylvania poll that way. But it's because they don't have. Here's all you need to know: their poll had North Florida and the Panhandle going to Biden.
Are you serious?
Yes.
I didn't look that much into it.
See, what is that the Trump is blowing them out so much along the Space Coast, almost a 20-point lead in their poll, and South Florida is 10 points more pro-Trump than it was. Still going Democrat, but still 10 points more Trumpish than it was in 2016. Their poll should have had Trump up by 5, 6, 7 points.
I was just going to say that. Yes, he's
the only reason it didn't is because they missed. They got the college kid out of Gainesville. They got the college kid out of Tallahassee.
That's right.
They got the state government worker. They got some of the Jacksonville hipster vote, but they missed the Dixie County blue collar vote.
They did this with DeSantis too. He wound up carrying 60% of the white vote. They did this with Rick Scott too. He got 58% of the white vote. That's not going to happen, and he's gonna net at least 50 out of Bay alone.
I mean, 2018, a +7 Democratic year, Florida went Republican for both Senate and governor.
Right. I mean, and
if you aggregated the House vote, it was similar.
And one was an incumbent.
Exactly.
A 3-term incumbent senator got ousted.
Exactly. Completely.
I mean, this is the idea, and Nate Silver knows he's full of crap because I have seen him make, and I've read them, where you make these arguments where you have to compare the state vote and shift to the national mood. And if you have a +8,
remember Silver made a big deal about how you had to treat Pennsylvania and Ohio as the same states.
That's right.
And he's totally not discussed that anymore.
That's gone too.
Yeah,
that's
the
gone
Facebook
too.
primary, the social media, just track that, folks. It's all trending Trump. I don't have as good of access to state data because they won't print it anymore. But that tells me that it's favorable. And in 2016, I could tell you by county who liked who on Facebook. Ended up being very predictive of certain trends once you were able to adjust for the certain metrics. But even by those metrics, Trump still has a huge social media edge in the swing states. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube watches of either Trump channels versus Biden channels. No matter how you measure it, massive enthusiasm. There is a much bigger enthusiasm gap for Trump this cycle than there was even in 2016 where it favored him.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Robert. I'll make this prediction right now. So, because this is how Florida is going to go. If you guys remember in 2016, we told you Florida was gone at 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. It was over, and everyone was saying how there was this surge in Hispanic votes, and it was going to doom Trump in Florida. They forgot. They try to get the Panhandle to stay home. What they do is absolutely disgusting and disingenuous. But I could see the margin out of Broward was going to be big. It was, but the rest of the state wasn't demonstrating that. And you had Pinellas going the way it was going, which was a shock. I thought maybe he'd get lucky and, take Pinellas by a hair. And he wound up, Pinellas doesn't swing the way these polls that Dave Wasserman wants to cite swing. It just doesn't, and it won't. Hillsborough is not a bellwether, but I predict they all focus on Hillsborough.
The demographics have changed in Hillsborough
completely.
So they're no longer, it's more like Orlando than it is like the rest of the state. The better part of the states to watch are places like Collier County in the southwestern part of the state, Jacksonville, some of the old folks along the north central part of what they used to call the Space Coast in Florida. The Panhandle is going to be lock steady Trumpish. And going back there, presidential primary participation rate, Trump got more presidential primary votes than Biden did. That has almost always been a guarantee of victory. So when you look at not only the inter-Hispanic numbers, both Cubans and Venezuelans and Colombians and Latin Americans trending much more Trumpish than they were in 2016, where they were skeptical. You add that the working class rural vote, about 20-25% from the Everglades up to the Panhandle, is also trending Trumpish by double digits. That the Space Coast elderly vote is trending Trumpish, and that there's not enough. The only voter group trending anti-Trump are some upscale Miami voters and upscale Palm Beach voters. That's about it. And that's just not very big numbers. Yeah, so that's where I think Florida will be. I have Trump winning Florida by 5.
Yeah, that would be a huge win in the state of
Oh, yeah.
Florida. I mean, it would be a huge, but
One of the
but
biggest
I
in
will
a while.
predict, Robert, that no matter what, they will say that Florida is lost
Oh,
to
yeah.
Donald Trump. They are so foolish. They don't know how to call these elections. It happened with DeSantis again. It happened with Nelson again. I mean, Nate was on there saying that they lost Monroe. They lost Pinellas. It's over. It's over. It's over. They didn't realize how much Collier had offset all of that. And Monroe was not. If you compare how much they squeezed out of Collier with what they lost in Monroe, they erased that threefold. And then they actually did a little bit better, which is why I think maybe at least Maris may be on to something, since Hispanics in that area are willing to talk to live callers, at least at higher rates than
Oh,
others.
Cuban voters. Oh, yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
I mean, so maybe
They're
they
they're
are
the least fashionable
catching.
voters in the world.
Yeah, they're fantastic though. They really are. They are funny. And so they're also the most loyal Trump voter I've ever polled anywhere. And those Venezuelans that set up shop right next to them, they just came
Whose
and
vote
nobody
share
really saw it.
has doubled. I mean, it's going
Yeah.
to be over. Put it this way: by themselves, they can double Trump's margin in 2016.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Robert, I don't think. What was it? I was talking with Laura the other day when we it wasn't a Florida poll, right? So it wasn't like we were polling that many, but we hit 10 Venezuelans almost in a row. It was really weird how, or at least that's how it happened, and it was trickled in. Every single one of them picked Donald Trump, no matter which age group. There was one 18 to 29. I think there was like 4 or 5 65 pluses, but every single one of them, and that 30 to 40, or really 45 to 65 group for him down there is going to be, it's good. And they vote at very high rates. So, they were wondering, and this goes back, I think it was over a year ago. Nate Cohen did one in Wisconsin and one in Florida, and he was making hay how strong Trump was actually in the Milwaukee suburbs, and how strong he was in southeastern Florida and in and around Miami-Dade. They had no clue, man. They are all, and he supposedly pulls off a voter file. So how does he not see? I don't know. I just don't get it. Unless they're not looking, Robert. I don't know.
Well, I think for most of them, even a conscientious pollster, unless they know the ancestral narrative of the groups that they need because of the different ways that they're voting, they're going to miss it, because those people are disproportionately not. The people disproportionately responding are the most Democratic trending group in the country, big metropolitan voters, and the group most disproportionately not responding is the most disproportionately Trump trending group in America, small town, white working class over 45. And that massive gap. Now, some of that's facilitated by the fact that, as your voter file shows, a lot of voters still have landlines, but they've basically quit calling landlines for the most part.
Yeah.
They're, at most, they're 1 in 3, 1 in 4 calls are landlines.
Which we do not. If we make a phone component, we do both. We absolutely do both. If it's going to be a phone component, and by the way, I don't like calling landlines on live call, because the people that are picking up the landlines are more conservative, and they would rather talk, even if you do talk to them first with a live caller, and then you say, all right, well, you're going to take an anonymous interview right now, and we'll siphon them off to the interactive voice response, and we never talk to them again. That's it. And we say, hello, this is so-and-so, whatever, take this poll. All right. Have a great day. We're going to, press the buttons as it's read to you, whatever spiel we read to them, because they want that anonymity. And, in 2016, it was Richard Hart. All right. Since we're blowing up pollsters today, let's do this one too. It was Richard Hart for NBC News. He called my house.
Really?
And he asked, I picked up, and it was a Hispanic interviewer with an accent. So it was clearly a Hispanic, accent. And she asked for my wife. It's supposed to be a random poll, right? So that was strike number 1. But she asked for my wife. And that's because, for people who don't know, my wife, I can't give away a woman's age, but, 30-something, Hispanic, more statistically likely, of course, to support Hillary Clinton. I am a man, I am white, and I am more statistically likely to be a Republican. So she actually asked for my wife, which was a cardinal sin, folks. It's a random sample survey. You don't ask for someone in the household. You get who you get. And then as my wife is going through this, put her on speaker. All right. So because I want to know what they're doing, right? As they're going through it, the social desirability bias. So they asked Laura who she was going to vote for. And she says Donald Trump. The audible reaction she got from this woman, like, okay. Like it was an audible. And she's like, what? I mean, I got my opinions. I'm allowed to have my opinions. Okay. For U.S. Senate, Marco Rubio. Oh, I mean, it was very in your face social. So I just grabbed the phone again. And I was like, ma'am, who are you calling for? We're not allowed to tell the agency, whatever. I said, okay, fine. I want to know the firm. You're allowed to tell me the firm. Maybe you can't tell me who your client is, but you absolutely have to identify your firm. Like that's if a respondent asks, that's ethics 101. The polling firm, we identify who we are off the bat. Hi, this is Big Data Poll. We're conducting this survey for this kind of entity. And that's how we do it. But we asked, and she said it was Hart Associates, whatever it was back then. So I knew immediately it was the NBC poll. That was the NBC poll in Florida. I couldn't believe it. And they made 2 huge errors. That interview was disgusting. There was no degree of professionalism during the interview at all. And then right off the bat, they asked for somebody in the household. It's a random survey, folks. She's supposed to have phone numbers, whatever it may be off the voter file, whatever, random digital dial, I think they used back then. They're just supposed to have numbers, and whoever gets it, if they're eligible to vote, is the only qualifier. Are you registered to vote? And then do you intend to vote? And then that's it. They're not allowed to ask for another person in the household that they may think, unless you get a kid. Can you give me,
It's also an old landline mechanism.
Yeah.
So the old landline mechanism would ask for either the youngest or oldest person in the household. They wouldn't disclose their new family information. They would just say youngest or oldest.
That's
and
right.
They would do that solely because they had problems getting random sampling when your only mode was live phone landlines. Because now you have, for people out there, you can do automated calls, you can do text, you can do emails, you can do basically either online, cell phone, or landline. And then within cell phones, you can either do text, live phone, or IVR. Within landline, you can do either either automated or live phone call. The problem is almost all of the pollsters are only using mostly one mode, sometimes only one mode, period, either only online or only mobile live phones. The second component, and that's been pushed by Nate Silver, that's the only model that works.
Which, by the way, is 5 times the cost of the money at least, folks. That's why.
Oh, exactly.
He's making money for these people.
And it makes it economically prohibitive for anyone to meaningfully compete, and it favors democratic-leaning posting methods. Because the other thing that's happened
worked out great for them.
You shift from a voter file to a consumer file, which is a problem. So a lot of people are not using voter files; they're using consumer files. This is a weakness in certain online polling methods, in particular. Some of the phone pollings they're still doing random digit dialing, which means they don't even have they have no idea even that they're registered to vote.
Yeah, they're an adult. The base sample is an adult, and then they rely on self-reporting,
which is highly problematic. People inflate that over all the time, particularly Democratic groups. Actually, I think it's because they think they should be registered to vote. Whereas like Republican groups that are not registered to vote, they just tell you, I'm not registered to vote, I don't care. Whereas a Democratic group thinks they should, even if they're not. And then the other component of that,
guilt. They have guilt, Robert. They do.
Exactly. You have the mode problem. You have the response rate problem. You have the voter file or consumer file or random digit file problem. But the last problem is the one you're talking about, which is over the past 5 years, they've shifted to a lower cost mechanism of who makes the phone calls. Mm-hmm. So they went from high-end phone bank centers where you had people that were highly likely to match up to the demographic that they were calling to low cost phone bank centers, which are disproportionately people who don't have a clue what name they're saying, don't even really
They're
care,
not. Yeah,
are
they don't
politically
care.
disconnected. That's where you're getting the accents. You're getting either Indian accents, or you're getting the kind of where people are like, why am I talking to this person? And they hang up the phone. And that's going to be disproportionately Republican groups that do so. So all of these problems have infiltrated and infected mainstream polling. And because it consistently supports a Democratic narrative, the Nate Silvers of the world have hid these problems from the public, lied about these problems to the public, and created a fake narrative that now Wall Street has figured out, and that's why the betting markets.
I hope you all heard that, because he hit the nail on the head right there. People ask me all the time why it is so hard to push back on this. Everything Robert just said. It benefits them anyway. It benefits their narrative. It benefits their friends. Because they're using lower quality banks, yet they're still charging anyway quite a bit. So they pocket more of the money. It's a
look at
boys
Opinion
club.
Research Center. Opinion Research Center just produced a few pro-Trump polls in 2016,
and were canned.
And even though they had been around forever by CNN, they got canned and fired right after the election because they weren't pushing what Quinnipiac and Monmouth and all those people are. And what are all those people doing? They're tracking what Nate Silver wants, because anybody who disagrees with Nate Silver, Nate Cohn, gets attacked and gets demonized and gets personally attacked, and uses his platform to do it. And so even though people like Nassim Taleb, who I personally don't like, he's such a jerk, but he's a very smart guy. When he says, by the way, Nate Silver is a joke, and anybody who knows math knows he can't even do math.
Absolutely. I mean, really, these are easily debunked. I've read some of his stuff. He's right on the money. Easily debunked.
And Silver and all of his people came to rally him. Anyone who has looked at Silver in detail knows he's a fraud. But that's why what he's there for is to promote certain narratives and to make certain pollsters get hired that promote those narratives, so that they're able to maintain their public prestige at their universities, and they're able to maintain the money train coming in. And anybody who disagrees gets attacked and gets demonized. And you better be willing to stand up all the time and never have any poll. I mean, honestly, if you're Rasmussen, you should have polls. Rasmussen, to their credit, they're not trying to wait to anybody. They're just saying, we're going to use the same polling methods we've always done and put it out. That's why they have more outliers than everybody else. But that's why they're also more accurate. As on average, they've been more accurate over the past 10 years than mainstream university pollsters. But they're just putting out, like, I don't think it's +4 Biden in Ohio, but that tells me that Rasmussen's just putting out an honest poll. They're not trying to weight it one way or the other. They're not trying to. Now, I would weight it in certain ways, but that's because I have confidence in the ability to make certain adjustments. But anybody like that gets attacked and demonized. Rasmussen's business has been half eviscerated because of Nate Silver's attack. Because for people out there that don't know, where all the pollsters make money is not in campaigns, but in business.
That's exactly right.
And here was a big clue that polling was going to get really, really hard. Gallup, all of their money has never come from campaigns. All their money, they pulled the presidential race to get credibility in the corporate world.
Yeah.
After 2012, they realized polling is so hard, we are more likely to get embarrassed than get correct in presidential polling. So even though we have been the number one pollster for almost 80 years in America, we're going to quit polling the presidential race. Oh, exactly. That was telling people this is now a very hard job. So how does it magically start hurting in the way Nate Silver wants? It's only because they're all doing what Nate Silver wants. And anybody who challenges him gets defamed and gets attacked. He's been a fraud for forever. He couldn't hold up to there's a reason why Nate Silver won't hire people that disagree with him. There's a reason why Nate Silver won't get into honest debates with people who disagree with him. It's because he can't hold up. He's a fraud. He knows he's a fraud. He's the way fraudsters act. Fraudsters avoid places where they can get exposed.
Damn right.
And that's who Nate Silver is.
Robert, I have extended invitations to him. I have sent emails to him, and he's not the only one, but they're generally all in the same clique. So they can't take me up on that. They can't take me up on it. But, the reason why
they won't even debate me
now.
I mean, even Sean Trendy put me out there. I was covered by Bloomberg. I was covered by the Associated Press. I was covered by the UK Times. I was covered by the London Times. I was covered by the Irish Times. I'm the most covered political bettor and most successful known political bettor anywhere in the country by far. And all of them honestly don't know who I am, because they shut even though I've been trolling them now teasing them now for 5 years. They don't know who, and it shows you how much they pay no attention. Like Nate Cohn's response was, isn't that only kind of remember him as he was pointing out low turnout in California by Hispanics in 2018. which was true, by the way. It's part of the reason why Florida stayed Republican. It just didn't matter in swing districts in the north because there's almost no Hispanics up there, which is, by the way, why they're not going to matter in the 2020 presidential election either outside of Florida and Arizona. Because there's not a big secret Mexican vote out of Pennsylvania, folks.
No.
So
right. They do though act like there's just this growing share everywhere, and it's just not true. And
they're in this tiny little echo chamber that would end if they took the PBS poll about disconnected Americans, they would be the most disconnected. They've never eaten at an Applebee's. They don't know what the Swamp Thing is. They don't know what regular TV is. They don't know what popular movies are. They don't know what popular culture is. They don't know anybody who's an evangelical Christian. That, by the way, Marist also, for whatever reason, they have fewer evangelical Christians in Florida than they do in like New York. I mean, that's they like 15% of the vote is evangelical Christian.
That's crazy. I mean, Protestants are almost half the vote in Florida. I mean, that's which is a evangelical Christian.
They're at least a quarter of the vote in Florida,
which is one of the evangelicals alone, right? Protestants are, more broadly about half, which is why Hispanics are more conservative over there too. They're starting to be. They're starting to convert.
It's why the Puerto Ricans in the central part of Florida are more Republican than the Puerto Ricans in New York City.
That's right.
It's the same for the rural, older Hispanics in West Texas and New Mexico and parts of Arizona and parts of rural Colorado, especially, are more. That was one of Trump's most pro-trending group. Also, it put a myth, what you pointed out yesterday, the whole myth that identity politics was the way for Republicans to go, to embrace immigration.
Total fraud.
Was always a fraud. And you see it, Trump went the other way. He went a very anti-illegal immigration, built a class-based appeal, and what's happening? He's getting record-setting improvement amongst African-American and Mexican-American and Cuban-American and Hispanic Americans across the country.
All along. This is what they wanted all along, right? Their autopsy after 2012. We got to do better. We got to do better. We got to be more diverse.
They don't vote on identity politics. That's upper middle class kids who are never going to vote Republican anyway. The working class voters vote on a class appeal to their, hey, I'm going to give you less war, I'm going to give you a better job, and I'm going to give you a safer home, and I'm going to give you a stronger school. And that's what they want, old school economic populism, because class is a much more powerful uniting factor than race ever can be. That's what Trump is really doing, even though Nate Cohn doesn't even realize it. That's how bad an analyst he is. That's all these guys are.
Because that's how he sees the world.
Yes,
that's the way they see it through.
They live in their own little Twitter universe where they talk to each other. They won't even engage. I engage people who disagree with me
all the time,
far more than they have ever even tried to engage. And when they do engage, it's always sarcasm. It's your David Wasserman. I'm going to be sarcastic and then block you from seeing what the sarcasm was.
SOB. Right.
Oh, completely. They're all bad at what they do.
Yep.
If they're right, then expose me in a debate, expose you in a debate, have a public discussion, have a public dialogue. Why be so scared? Why not take an honor bet? They have no skin in the game because they get to keep their jobs as long as they keep saying what the media wants them to hear. Right. Now, the problem is going to be when they turn out badly wrong and have misled the media into thinking Biden had an easy win when he loses, then maybe they just all get fired because media realizes what ESPN realized. You guys are useless. You guys are worse than I could take a dart. A monkey throwing darts could be more accurate than Nate Silver. That's
and I'll say this right now to folks: if you can't stand the media and can't trust the media, and you're tired of this cycle, you want to end it, because I think you're right. I think they can take a few blows at once, but they can't take repeated blows. And a midterm, a half, and that's another scam. This idea that they were wrong and that they were right in the midterms.
If I was wrong about the midterms, I should have lost money on the midterm.
That's right.
And I get these people coming at me, and it's like, I lost my house bet, but I won the Senate bet, which I shouldn't have won. I said there's a reason why both of them were underdog bets. Yeah. And the reason is because my bet was there was going to be no blue wave, number one, and number two, incumbency would hold up in the House. I was half right. There was no blue wave. That's why the state legislatures didn't swing. That's why the governorships didn't swing. That's why the Senate seats didn't swing. What there was incumbency didn't matter. If you the combination of big tech, big media, and
there's
money,
so much of this stuff, right?
And it could matter in the House. The other reason it could matter in the House, I was telling people afterwards when I was studying the election, is a lot of people don't even know who their congressman is. So
let's be real.
In the House, you can get away if you have big media on your side, big money on your side, big tech on your side. And they had all three in droves in 2018. Then you can sneak a win. Whereas statewide, you can't really get away with that. And where you really cannot get away with that is at the presidential level.
And all of those little independent candidates that they helped push, and they did it with some digital stuff, some on the ground stuff for people who don't know. And I got the paperwork, I mean, it was
just look at what LinkedIn
genius.
did in 2017. They previewed what they were going to do in the Senate race in Alabama in 2017. LinkedIn did activities. Facebook did it. By the way, I have different Facebook accounts and different social media accounts associated with different businesses and entities I have. By some of those accounts, I would show up as a Democratic profile.
Right.
Well, my Democratic profile is getting registration to vote notices twice a day.
I get that. I know what you're talking about.
I'm getting zero notices on my Republican-oriented pages.
I got text messages
a day
from Andrew Gillum.
Just bombarded.
Did you
bombarded.
vote?
I'm getting emails, text messages, Facebook messages.
Yeah.
Twitter, to their credit, I'm getting promoted ads on the Democratic side from Twitter, but that's all. But all of the ones where they're massive manipulation.
Apple too. Their notifications are
all leaning in a certain direction.
Yeah,
it's one big massive push. It might be why Spotify magically erased all the populist conservatives from Joe Rogan's podcast when he went over to Spotify. Supposedly that's going to get fixed. My guess is it'll get fixed right around November 11th.
I was just going to say, you want to end the career of these frauds, re-elect Donald Trump.
Absolutely.
You want to end the career, because I will promise this to everybody. I will not let up this time. Last time I was nice about it. Listen, I beat you in 2014. I beat you again. All right. Obviously, I'm better than you at this. So I took jabs at him, but not to the level, like, you know what I mean, where I'm going to go.
There's so many places
this time, Robert, it could cost me money with this. Like you said before, what people don't, it is their goal. And this is what it dawned on me last night, actually. So I just get they know, I'm sure, so you just get this contract. They're trying that. I can only assume, man, they're trying to sink me. So if PPD, for people who don't know, PPD kind of pays for itself. We never made money doing that. This has always been a public service, basically, for you guys. 2016 spent oodles of our own money. In 2018, I promised I wouldn't do it, but I had to do some. So I still spent, especially in Florida. That's my damn state. I'm going to poll Florida and tell you who's going to win the Senate race, who's going to win the governor's race, and by what margin, right? But
and
overwhelmingly, our money comes from private clients.
From the corporate Pollster. Well, to give people an idea, one way I was going to expose in 2016, I went around with it. I was like, I'm going to create a fake polling company and predict and say my polls are predicting certain outcomes in certain states that I knew. And of course, my quote unquote polls were going to be the most accurate. And I was going to bring in a journalist behind the scenes, say you can't report on it until after the election, and say, how is it I could create a fake polling company and be more accurate than all the media pollsters, all the university pollsters, and Nate Silver and the rest combined? Just to expose what a bunch of scam artists they were.
As long as you told somebody too what you were doing, like an experiment, it actually could have been. Is that what you're going to be?
It was going to be the prank of all pranks. Yeah. And then I was like, well, I decided I'm going to just spend all my time focusing on betting on the election. Now this cycle, it's not going to matter because the political betting markets are going Wall Street's direction, so I won't get the value. Now, people who've been listening to the show, they would have bet Trump at 35. They would have bet Trump at 40, and at 40. And now he's already between 45 and 55, depending on where you are in the marketplace. So, and in fact, you could cash your bet right now and have made a 20% profit in 3 weeks.
You could have been in and out if you would have went in on before he had that run. Because he took a little bit of a bath when some of these other
the economic effects of the pandemic were always going to kill him. So he was always going to go into high single digit deficits anyway in June and July, because that's when people were like, hold on a second, the economy sucks now because of all the lockdowns.
He decided to do the lockdown, Robert. As soon as
there was a delay in the backfiring, but the backfiring was always coming. But now that he's totally out of that, the dynamic is totally shifting, and Democrats are starting to realize what a huge mistake they made I mean, they have to become anti-vaccine in order, because they realize Trump is trying to rush the vaccine as another way. But it's already sinking. COVID in Florida is number 2 or number 3. Almost everywhere, it's nosediving as the top. Particularly if you look at independents, it's like number 3 or number 4, and it's going down, down, and down.
Policing and crime is overtaking healthcare. And look, I said that weeks ago, right? And I said, if I'd have kept, even in the Epoch Times poll, in the national polling, because we had done others, but in the national polling, it really inflates its importance because it was so dramatically on the decline that if I would have kept polling another 2 days, it would have been in 3rd or 4th place. I'm not even joking.
That's where I was going.
The Susquehanna poll, which
for everybody out there, that Pennsylvania poll, they never had Trump that close.
Never.
On average, he was down by 8 in their.
It wasn't until their final poll, which they had Clinton +2 at 45-43, but that was their final poll, folks. November 2nd. That was their November 2nd poll. He was always down by 8.
And I always separate out the poll. I always look at polling up to the current. So I look at polling up until the last 2 weeks, because the last 2 weeks they have to be a little bit more honest. It's often tracking. They usually are hurting to a specific number, and so I ignore a lot of the polls in the last 2 weeks. I focus on polls in terms of their forecasting accuracy that were before the last 2 weeks before Election Day. And so there, if you look at those polls, the polls on average overstated the Democratic margin by 6 points in 2016, by 8 points in the Midwestern swing states in 2016. So by that measurement, Trump is doing better in all of those states than he was in 2016.
With the Detroit Free Press poll, that was
shocking. They often had him down like double digits in 2016.
That was like a Clinton +12, man. That was like a Clinton +12 poll. And Mitchell got a little closer toward the end, but that was like still Clinton +6.
One little Senate pick, James probably, despite the incompetency of his campaign, James is likely is going to steal the Michigan.
You think you may take it from Peters, huh?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. They are incompetent. I mean, they just are, and that's a lot of big money. GOP. Look, for people who don't understand, this pisses off conservative voters when I tell them this, but they don't know their party like I know their party. When somebody wins a nomination, they will take a good man and turn him into a piece of shit. I'm sorry for, it's just the way it is. Pardon my French.
They have the same cultural biases as
scumbags come in.
World.
They
have no understanding of the ordinary voter, no understanding of what
motivates Ryan's them. Favorite pollster comes in, buddy. That's the way it goes. Karl Rove, he'll come and he'll swear and attest that this is the campaign manager you need. So get rid of your friend who got you through the primary. This is what they do. And then they start ripping you off with money left and right. And they come in and they take ridiculous gobs. 35, one candidate in Michigan, Robert. And thankfully, because he talked to me and he was clueless, and he talked to a couple other people too that were looking out for him, 60%. 60. And that was a bunch of stuff that he really didn't know it until he had somebody he finally listened to the advice I gave him and another friend gave him. It was a mutual friend. And he had a forensic dive. And the guy you talk about taking a bath. He was taking more. It was a little bit more than every $10 he raised. He took a little bit more than $6, and he raised a lot.
There's a lot of grifters in that world. A lot of grifters. Well, I mean, like when I first campaigns, a congressional Democratic campaign for Congress, 1994. Wrong year to be running in a general election if you're a Democrat.
Right.
But we were in the primaries, and the pollster came in, Philadelphia Pollster, and they were predicting, along with the campaign manager, that this professional class guy that they really liked from Oak Ridge, it was an East Tennessee Oak Ridge, that he was definitely going to win, that their polling said so. And the guy's name was named Dupaluri. And I just told him Tennesseans ain't voting for somebody whose name they can't figure out. It ain't happening. Right. It's like, it's not prejudice. It's just like, I want to be able to know how to say my congressional name, know his name.
Yeah. That's a matter of relating to somebody too.
Yeah,
it's not really prejudice,
and it's recognizing what. Yeah, it's exactly relatability, and just voters are voters, people are people, humans are humans. So it was like it wouldn't take a genius to know Jacob Blake's father was probably racist and anti-Semitic if you understood certain aspects of that political background.
I can't believe they did that. Well, I can.
Of course, of course they don't care, but they think it's going to be a voter turnout mechanism. Gang members don't vote, folks. That just ain't happening. They'll be happy to go out and riot and loot, and all the Antifa types the same way. They're not voters. So the idea this is going to gin up turnout turnout. There's one of these lefty professors that's saying, "Oh, I see a surge," and he was trying to say there was a surge in new voters requesting ballots. But then you look at his data, and the data he's talking about is that the percentage that amongst Democrats requesting new ballots in late August and the first week of September, there were more new voters than there had been in the past this year.
Well, this is a totally different model this year. People can't make this comparable. They can't. It's nothing.
If you look at the actual numbers requesting ballots, they were tiny. And it was taking a number that looked impressive only if you took out the context. And in fact, if you looked at the context, it was much weaker than I expected. I expected to see a lot more Democrats requesting ballots than were in a lot of these states. Because I was like, the whole pitch this year is for all of them to vote by mail.
Right.
So by now, you should have almost all of them requesting their ballots already. And yet you're seeing a higher percentage than normal, but nowhere near what public opinion polls say they're going to do. So that tells me the turnout is going to be worse than they even expect if they can't get it.
We're at 145. We're not really even screening heavy right now, but that's where we're at
170, 180.
That's crazy to me, man. This is folks, go look. And you know what? For the next show, I will plot this on a graph and I will show people turnout rates and the totals, right? Yep. And we'll go over this next show, Robert, because this is crazy. The idea that 08 was a big election, folks. That was a pretty big election. And then it dipped in 2012. And then Trump did get out low propensity voters in places where he needed to get them out. So he actually got more of a turnout than Obama did in 2012. So, but still, what we were talking about, 137 million people total, not two-party. Two-party was like 135 or something, right? So we're not talking about, these 180. So I heard that too on Fox News the other night. I don't know who was Brett's, like Shannon Bream was doing some like real rundown. Like, this is nuts. I mean, she's not a stupid woman. Shannon, you've been on her show before. She's not a stupid woman. She has to know what she's saying is total BS. It's never happened before.
A lot of them are just they're not really politically attuned. So they're like smart in a certain space, but they're disconnected still from the voter base.
Right.
So and that's true pretty much for everybody at Fox. Tucker Carlson is intellectually on the same wavelength as the base, but he too does not come from the base. Yeah. There's nobody at Sean Hannity just recognized through his radio phone calls which way to go.
Yeah, I totally agree.
The Trump train.
I totally agree.
But none of these guys are instinctively on that train. Not the way your independent social media types like now, Cernovich is his own animal. He reflects more the independent mindset. But your Jack Posobiec and other people that are really representative and reflective of the true Trump. The real Trump populist base actually does have a good expression, a good presence on Twitter in particular.
You were right about Tim Pool, too. I was listening to his podcast a couple of days ago, and he just said it.
People like Cernovich, who had doubts about Trump's reelection, are now saying landslide. So
I saw that. He's leading among Hispanics. Laugh out loud, landslide. I saw that earlier. But Poole outwardly said the other day that he's voting for Donald Trump. I was like, what? I heard that right?
And he's hammering that message every single day, reasserting it. So like 2004, like 2012, you're going to see the electorate even be more Trumpish than it was in the prior presidential election. And so whatever you see in the polls, I think basically Trump will be up. I think the polls will keep Biden up.
Yeah, me too.
But, I think they will herd closer to they'll be nervous about herding at 4 because of 2016. They'll probably herd at 5 or 6.
5 or 6.
I think most of the election cycle will be 7 or 8. I think they're looking at that 2018 House number that was really at 7, wasn't really 8.5. And I think they're going to say 7 throughout the general election in 20. So I think you're going to get a herded number right around 7 for most of the media university polls, sometimes up to 8, 9, 10, sometimes down to 3, 4, 5. But you're going to see that RCP average, Real Clear Politics 538 average, stay right around 7. 538 will probably boost at a point with their
with their little numbers, fake house effects. Right.
Imagine taking credit for averaging numbers when you don't average numbers.
I know.
It's unbelievable. Like, how do you do that? You don't average numbers. You move the numbers. You say, okay, the Trafalgar says Trump by 2. I'm going to say that really means Biden by 2.
I know. They look.
other
somebody asked me how to explain it, because I was saying when I went a little bit, I don't know if you watched yesterday, but I went a little off the rails on this little piece of trash because I'm tired of him. He's a slime ball, man. I mean, only a scumbag of very low character would do this, like only with, look, I get criticizing methods. I get all that. This though is a personal.
Yeah, he's a fraudster. I mean, he's a guy.
Yeah, he's a freaking huckster, man.
Faith. He attacks personally. He attacks with false information. He lies repeatedly. He lies by omission and commission. He's a dishonest actor who has done great damage to what a lot of these other pollsters didn't recognize is that
he's killing us, man.
Power over time is going to discredit the entire institution of polling.
That's right.
What happens when 2020 turns out wrong again, like 2016?
And you know me for years now. That's my biggest fear. That has always been. And in 2018, they used, like I said, some half-ass broken clock kind of close to the House vote as a way to cover for their failures at the state level. And that is a bad sign, because the presidential election is a state-by-state race. If they didn't get it right with the Senate races, if they didn't get it right with the gubernatorial races, state by state by state, where it mattered. Okay, like give it a Reuters poll, Biden plus 12 today. Reuters, Beto O'Rourke did not beat Ted Cruz in Texas. I mean, this is the kind of misses we're dealing with. They're going to kill us if we're wrong again. We'll be finished. I'm talking about as an industry. People will never listen to us again, Robert.
And the other component of that is that the House, if you looked at the internal polling, that they were still wrong with the House. So
absolutely.
The average House poll was at 10 or 11 through most of the summer and early fall, number one. So it was about 3-4 points off again. And if you looked at their internal numbers, the way they got to that 10 or 11, going back to that football bet analogy, was thinking Georgia was going to run all over Tennessee, when in fact half of what happened was Tennessee fumbled a lot to cause the difference. The same thing happened there. They had bad weighting by education in a lot of those polls.
That was education and region, big deal, or geography,
The reason why Democrats held was incumbency didn't matter, and working class ancestral Democrats in the North voted Democrat down ballot, but that was not what those House polls was predicting.
No, the internals were totally different. That was,
coincidentally right, not consequentially right.
And let me ask you this, because the other day when you sent me that message, I looked it up. The USC. So they had to change, they had to tweak their methodology when they were 4 points off favoring Trump.
Nate Cohn and Nate Silver pretending hasn't happened. They're still lying to people about the USC methodology being the same as 2016 when it's
my God, they wrote 3 articles about it already. I read every single one of them. I mean, this is the fraud, the level of fraud that I'm talking about. And they have the nerve to accuse anybody else of being disingenuous with people. They have some damn nerve. The USC poll was about 6-7 points. It depends what they were about 7 points off of the House vote. When I read what they wrote,
14 to 15 points.
Yeah, 14, 15 points. That's right.
The last poll, I think it was by 13.
13, yeah.
Like all this hitting on Rasmussen for their poor word phrasing. And it wasn't, the reason why they did it is because it's the way they had always done it for 15 years.
For 15 years, yeah.
But even if they had polled, with the House poll number, their poll number was off less than USC's poll and CNN's poll was.
Right.
In many respects.
So it warranted a change in methodology when they overestimated Trump by 4 points. But it doesn't warrant a change in methodology when they overestimate Democrats by 7. Can you explain this to me? So you see what I'm saying? This is the fraud, people. This is the fraud.
I'd been tracking USC since 2008 because of their experimental methodology.
And they were right on the money, actually, in 2012. They did well.
Yeah, they were. What they got right in 2012 was they adjusted to control by a 2008 metric. So they made sure that their 2012 voters, they had proof, had voted the way the 2008 election turned out. The second filter was they only did the same group of people almost all the way through. In 2016, they added a third filter of adding over sampling of rural working class voters because they recognized those voters were missing from most polls by paying them and by sending them tablets to respond to polls.
Well, they removed them now.
Yeah,
they're gone now.
Not only that, they removed all the rural voters that they included before, which was critical to them tracking something unique. Second, they removed their weights. The weights they did in 2012 and 2016 to weight by the prior presidential vote is completely gone. And like they're predicting a ridiculous sum of new voters, just like everyone else.
Yep, they are.
And when you adjust for that and look at their past polling, their bias was even worse than your typical media university poll in 2012, 2014, 2018, if those weights had not been
those weights were not applied. Yeah. And if you look at this last cycle in 2018, that was worse than in 2016. So I get the idea to tweak. My point is, though, if you had to tweak after 2016, why aren't you tweaking after 2018? Because you were more wrong in 2018 than you were in 2016.
No criticism from Nate Silver after 2018.
That's my. I mean, I know the answer, brother.
2016, but after 2018.
Yes.
I never mentioned the Democratic polling that has been off. I mean, again, Nate Silver's number one pollster is Marist.
Right.
They have been the worst pollster every cycle. 2014, 2016, 2018. They were the worst pollster in every single state poll. They were consistently wrong. So like there was only one or two states that they weren't the worst pollster. That's not a prize you should seek. So it's not a surprise, but it's why they're going to go the direction they're going to go. And like one of the big, like Nate Cohn today was saying, USC is very useful because they are pulling the same.
Oh, now they are.
Now
they are.
What it is they used to poll the same group every week, and they're polling a subsection of them each day. Then they decided to triple the size. So they just have an online panel like everybody else now. So that each week they're going to get about 2,000, maybe 2,000 people that will respond. It's going to vary depending on what kind of response rate they get. But that's no longer the same 2,000 like it was in 2016 and 2012. It's out of a group of 6,000 responding. So that means that's just like any other online panel. It's a little bit better than random, but that's it.
Yeah, I was just going to say that is, it might as well be. And, you're not going to see that kind of fluctuation really anymore, because if you're only looking at a small pool anyway, and it's not representative to begin with, then it's not going to change that much. It's just not. It's going to be a Biden. They may be really embarrassed this time around. I mean,
if they're smart, they'll make it tighter by election day. If they're smart, they'll make it +2 by election day.
Yeah. I think, like I said, I thought we'll see how it goes. If they don't cost me something with this bull, but I can see what they're doing to get there. I just think that it is really possible for our final national to be Biden 3, Biden 2, Biden 4, and him lose the Electoral College. It is absolutely possible.
I mean, right now, I have it at Trump slightly winning the popular vote by like a half a point nationally. The X factor I see there is I think Democrats can pad. I think the mail-in balloting out of California, Illinois, and New York
counted for a month, man. For a month out there,
really pad the national column. But I have the non-Hispanic white share of the vote is around 75%, which is about the same as 2016, because I think there's going to be heightened Trump turnout. African-American vote down from 12 to 11 to 11.5% of the vote. I have Trump improving there, only losing, I think, by 75 points, as opposed to the 85 points he lost that vote by, or 80, depending on where you're at, in 2016.
Yeah, a word on that real quick before you keep going. I see what some of the other pollsters are coming up with Trump's. I think it's absolutely reasonable he gets 12%, 13%, but some of them are up there, buddy. They're a little high for me.
You're looking at 85 to 15 is a 70-point win. I have it basically being about 88 to 12, 87 to 13. So
87 to 13. Yeah, that's right about
a 75-point lead. It might end up something like 85, 10, 5 with some Kanye votes and some other votes scattered in, something like, but it'll be somewhere around. But I think Biden stays in the 80s. I don't think he breaks into the 90s with the African-American vote.
He's weak right now. I mean, what do we have, Matt? 66.7. That's abysmal.
Particularly amongst black men. I think his weakness is going to be
his weakness.
Black men, particularly black men who do not self-identify as Democrat. So I think that's going to be a weak point for him. And then I have the Hispanic vote increasing from 8% to 9%. It might get upwards of 10%, depending on how you do. I have some Hispanic votes in the other category. There's always an issue there because you have mixed race voters who more identify as other than Hispanic. But I have them probably about 9% of the electorate, give or take. And I think Trump reduces his margin. I think improves his margin from losing that vote by about 40 points in 2016 to losing it by about 30 in 2020.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
And that's enough to lock in states like Arizona. If that holds up in Arizona,
There is. Yeah, I mean, Robert, we got I would have to go back and check, but we never had Hillary Clinton, I don't think, this low among black voters. And among Hispanics, I don't think so either. I'll go and check, but Biden,
Maris's numbers, they had Biden's black voter share margin down by 15 points.
Yeah, that's bad.
Their own polling. So almost all the polling now, the black voter group is very tough to poll. You get small sample sizes. You get a large number of black voters that don't respond to polls. So it is tricky. But I think but looking at a lot of demographic trends, looking at ratings trends, looking at some of what's happening in voter registration and presidential primary participation, I think Trump getting a few point uptick is a pretty safe bet at this point within the black vote. And the black vote being down as a voter share, I think is a pretty safe bet. What's definitely the case is he'll do better amongst Hispanic voters. The question is how much.
We always get, like a large chunk of black voters who will say they're undecided only to like race back to the Democrat at the last minute. Here's the thing, though. Usually we have the Republican candidate at like 4%, 6%. And then when they race back to the Democrat, the Republican will pick up another point or two. It's that small. Trump, though, we have already three. We got him, and I am confident because of where they came from. We profiled just the black voter. I know what they look like. I know where they come from. I'm confident we're right. He's at 12.3, and you got this nice chunk, 13% that's undecided. Even if one or two more go to him, that's an astonishing number. And then with the Hispanics, he's just about 32% with almost 11% undecided. I really think he could gobble up another couple of points of those. So that would put him approaching.
All he needs is if he gets to 35 and Biden's at 65.
I think that's easily doable.
That's where I have him at, basically. Or I have it basically being something like 64, 34.
34, yeah.
2 points scattered amongst the libertarians and the Greens.
Yeah, what do we got? Joe Jorgensen taking like 2 points.
By the way, for everybody out there, watch. They figured out from 2016 that when you include third-party candidates, with shy Trump voters could park their votes with third-party candidates.
Absolutely.
So that Trump's margins were always better when they polled a four-way poll than a two-way poll. So this cycle, notice that the media is not doing as many four-way polls.
No.
They're not reporting the results from that as their top line.
And Amy Walter wrote a whole column about how much better Joe Biden is doing among those third-party voters, which is something you and I had talked about a while ago.
By the way, it's wrong on 3 levels. One, what they're doing is they're looking at, of the third-party voters, picking one of the two candidates.
Yeah.
Biden has a big lead, but that's only amongst a third of all third-party voters. So it's one of those numbers that so what happens is you get, say, when you look at actual third-party voters, 2/3 of them are going to vote third party.
Yeah, it doesn't account for Biden plus 12, guys. Biden plus 13.
They take that 1/3 group that's deciding they're going to vote for one of the candidates, but when you actually factor in how much it's at most in any state a half a point for Biden.
Yeah.
At most, in many places, 0.2, 0.23.
It would be very small.
Exactly. And here's my hunch. My hunch is that a lot of your third-party polling in 2016 was not for that third-party candidate, but it was a way for shy Trump voters to park their vote without telling the pollster they were going to vote for Trump. Or in some cases, they were doing that for themselves, like where they'd already kind of made up their mind for Trump, but just couldn't say that out loud even to themselves. They would say, well, I'm going to vote for the Libertarian. I'm going to vote for the party candidate. Because
I think some of that happened to us nationally. Definitely.
About half the Libertarian Party vote ended up going to Trump if you compared poll to election result outcomes. My view is that didn't happen. That isn't because they all of a sudden shifted. It's because they were just parking their vote. If you're in an upper middle class suburb and you kind of like Trump secretly, but you don't want anybody to know it, the Libertarian was a safe place to
Joe
park.
Jorgensen. Yeah, or this time around, but back then it was. And she's not getting, I was actually a little bit surprised that we even got the number we did for her, because she's not getting any media attention at all. So 3 points at this moment, we probably, what is it? It's early September. We probably had Gary Johnson at around 4 right now, 5. But in the end,
got up to 6 or 8.
Yeah, in the end, like when we got into that final stretch, it looked like we saw Hillary kind of gaining a little bit, but it wasn't going to be. There was just not enough left. So all of a sudden, this giant chunk sent him to like 7 points or whatever was the final, and that was then Stein was, I think, around 2.5. That didn't bear out nationally, but it was telling. Well, it was close. We were within the confidence interval, but it was telling, because it did say that people may be leaning to Trump, and they just don't want to tell you. Now, the state level polling, we got much better allocation of the vote share for third parties.
And I think that historically, that's a pattern, by the way, of parking.
Yeah.
In particular, if there's a controversial election, of parking your vote with a third party candidate. So and it's also a psychological way to not make a decision publicly to yourself, if you will. So, I think you'll see you'll see the same phenomenon happen again, where Trump does better. But here's an example of analysis that's out there. One of the more popular YouTubers did an analysis of this, and his conclusion was, because the two-party polls are showing Biden doing better, that means there's fewer votes for Trump to get, so he's really in trouble. And it was
that's kind of the Amy Walker argument.
That's a horrible analysis. If he did the same poll 4 ways, you get the same result as 2016. They just don't know how to even analyze. Well, all they do is poll watch, which is the worst way to be a election forecaster.
It really is.
And they don't even do that well.
I tell people all the time, because I'm constantly with the DMs. Oh, did you see this poll? What do you think about that? Oh, I think this. Oh, this means that. Guys, chill out. Number one, they don't have predictive value even right now. They really tend not to. And I wrote, I think that was in late August, telling people in an election like this, don't even ask me until mid-October. Really, I think I know the fundamentals and how it's going to go. Yeah, even some of my own polling shows that there's some, but that is the nature of polling, by the way. That is the nature. The polling just caught up to the fundamentals at the end.
Correct. I expect Biden to have, even if you had an honest and accurate poll and an accurate response rate, I would expect Biden to be up by 2 to 4 all the way up until Election Day. I think it'll end up being a tie or close to it on Election Day, just because I think a lot of voters have made up their mind, but they're not going to say so. Some of them are not going to say so because they're not going to admit it publicly. When I was testing this in 2016, traveling throughout Eastern Ohio and Western Pennsylvania, I remember this working class woman who was the wife of a coal miner. And I could tell she didn't want to say who she was inclined to. And I said, I think a lot of people are just going to walk into the voting booth, and that's when they're going to make up her mind. And her eyes lit up. She's like, absolutely. Da, 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 da. And what she was really saying was, unconsciously, she knew she was going to vote for Trump, but she almost felt bad looking in the mirror and saying she was going to vote for that.
Yeah. And people, they absolutely do this. And I can't tell how many times, we get like kind of winks and nods of people who, they'll never want to outwardly just say it. So it is real. And the idea that that somebody would put a sign in their front lawn, yet wouldn't lie to a pollster, is the most ignorant thing I've ever heard. Spoken like a non-pollster.
There's also 2 totally different groups of people. I was shocked. I was like, I remember saying yesterday to someone that said, you watch tomorrow or the next day, someone's going to come out and say, it can't be true that there's both enthusiasm for Trump and shy Trump voters. And I was like, wow. So that means you're telling me in the world today, there can't be anyone who's a loud fan or a quiet fan.
I think that it's
everything that exists. It's
right.
Like, your upper middle class voter, or your voter who, for whatever reason, doesn't want the world to know that they're a Trump supporter, is an entirely different voter group than the one that's leading the Trump boat parade. And the idea that both exist is just mind-blowingly incompetent by Nate Silver. And now I think he was getting ratioed last time.
Groupthink. Yes. That's the problem, because they don't understand the various they don't, because they all are like each other.
They don't understand how they think.
They don't understand. That's right.
That's why they can't evaluate and assess the accuracy of polls or the utility of them. That's why they're ignoring every other form of data that's more consequential than public opinion polls by media and universities. They've created an environment where everybody's going to say the same thing in the polling world and it be wrong.
Yeah.
Because they've scared off, even though they say we love outliers. As soon as somebody does an outlier, they bash them.
They trash them. That's right.
Unless
Trafalgar and Rasmussen aren't particularly accurate, so I wouldn't go putting too much stock in whatever. Thought you loved outliers. I thought you did, right? So they're just, again, it's a fraud. And I don't know.
With the end of these guys, if Trump wins,
it's over.
I think that the people will never take them seriously again.
Well, you heard it right there, folks. I'm going to break out of here. I guess we'll end it here, Robert. But you heard it there. Robert said it right there. You want them to come crashing down, then what can I tell you? Re-elect Donald Trump if you want that to happen, because that really, I think, is the only way some of these media outlets to, I mean, look, some of this that's a whole other show, but they have to be punished for committing a fraud on the, like, you can't tell the country your president's a traitor, man. I mean, this is nuts, I mean, really. So they're turning me into a hell of a cynic, Robert. It's unfortunate, but they're turning me into a hell of a cynic. There's just no other explanation. There really isn't, and it's just gone to the era of actual real men. They're spineless little cowards. You can't, like, my number's not exactly difficult to find. I mean, it's just spineless little cowards who would do that. That's not how real men behave.
The
beta boys, man. Beta boys.
It presents is to create an accurate polling system that accurately forecasts, in your case, to give yourself a market edge with everyone else and bring defamation suits as needed. And then on the betting side, for all the ordinary folks out there, even Predictive has a little bit of money you can bet. My bet recommendations are still bet Trump. I still have them at 75%, though that number is increasing as I'm seeing certain trends that I wanted to see if I was going to bet heavy on Trump. And bet Trump to win Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Iowa, Florida, all of those, North Carolina, all of those states have good odds on Trump. So that's the recommended bets. We'll have some more recommended bets on the House and the Senate in later shows. But go at it. So far, if you follow the bets, you've already made money. So keep betting at it. And that's the one gift that silver keeps on giving is as incompetent.
Right. He keeps going, he keeps, providing opportunities to make money, being on the other side of his stupidity. I mean, really. I mean, that's it. I'll tell you, I was trying to dig the whole damn time, to find the tweet that I did after the Super Bowl. Like there's just nothing the guy does right. There is nothing he does right. He can't do anything. He fails at predicting football games, baseball games. He fails at predicting elections. He's just a professional fraudster. He's a professional failure. And say this stuff to my face.
They're going to project their vices onto others. It's the classic trait. So accuse others of is what they are guilty of. What they claim for themselves is what's true of others rather than themselves.
Right. Well, you better hope he doesn't cost me any money because I'll take it out of his. I am not kidding. And that's the way it'll have to go. All right.
We'll be back next Monday, right?
Yeah. I was just gonna say, let's look. We did this and decided it, and then it was Labor Day, and it didn't dawn on me how we were gonna make that up. But listen, we'll be back on next Monday, really every Monday, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And don't forget to follow Robert right there on Twitter at Barnes_law. And you can follow me at Peoples_pundit. Folks, thanks for watching. Nice size crowd. Don't forget to subscribe to the page People's Pundit Daily on YouTube. Don't forget to like the page on Facebook. And we'll see you back next week. All the best, folks.